Shalom. I hope you can hear me. I have to move this closer. So, Yosef was supposed to be joining. I'm guessing he's running a little late because I had some confusion with the timing. Chazi was supposed to be joining me, but I don't see him. Yosef!
Hey, Jacob.
You're in the sukkah.
I am.
Wow. So you want to give us a little drasha about the 70 bulls? No?
Sure. I mean, it's straightforward enough. Okay, we can do some basic 101. Hi, Laura. On Sukkot, this is one of the only a few certainly holidays in Tanakh that actually talks about non-Jewish participation, at least as an ideal at some point, from the book of Zechariah, which we read the final chapter of on the first day of Sukkot, in which it is described that all nations of the world will come to the temple and offer sacrifices to God and recognize that He is the one true God, and that He is the source of everything, specifically rain, because that is the thing we're most concerned about this time of year, especially in ancient world, but also today to some degree.
When do we switch to Morid HaGeshem?
We will switch on
At the end.
on Shmini Atzeret, so on Shabbat.
Okay.
So he just asked when we switch to praying for rain, which we don't want rain while we're in our sukkah because that would not be fun. If it rains, we just don't eat outside, but it's kind of sad. So we would like the rain, or we like the possibility of rain to start after the holiday.
And it's been raining in New York like you wouldn't believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
3 Jews, none of us live in New York. Amazing. So yeah, no, it's been amazing weather here. Absolutely gorgeous sukkahs so far. We had like literally 3 minutes of rain as I was making Kiddush second night, and otherwise we've had no rain. Yes. So, and the other thing with Sukkot and the nations of the world, in addition to the very clear part of the book of Zechariah, chapter 14 or 12, whatever the last chapter is that there's this weird sequence of we bring 13 bulls on the first day and 12 on the second and 11 on the third, and eventually you by the time you get to the seventh day we've brought 70 bulls, which symbolically is understood to represent the nations of the world. And this is after, let's say, one reading of Yom Kippur is after we work on ourselves quite a lot. We start looking outward on what our work for the rest of humanity needs to be, and part of that is fixing our relationships with the rest of humanity, and fixing and helping humanity fix its relationship with God, potentially, or something along those lines. So yes, there we go. Okay, now Chazi's here. So my Dvar Torah is done. We can get into the meat of it. Hey, Modim L'Simcha, Chazi.
Modim L'Simcha. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you good.
Chazi got up at 5 a.m. for this.
Martyr. True martyr.
Sadiq Yesod Olam.
It's important things we're discussing.
So in the description, I have a link to Rabbi Breitowitz's discussion, which was very interesting. He actually said a lot of things that I think are important and some of them innovative. And coming from someone who is respected as a posek, halachot like he is, it was worthy of us having a little commentary. Although I'm actually thinking, so at the end, he mentioned there were resources that people could email him and ask about. So I did just that, and he did send me a, a, a Q&A that's been translated from the Hebrew to the English from Rabbi Yoel Schwartz of blessed memory, and which was also, I mean, I thought even more mind blowing actually, um, and and yeah, I mean, part of the reason we decided to do this was my initial reaction was, while I very much appreciated Rabbi Breitowitz's speech, um, I didn't feel it was very accessible to people who don't have a background in halacha. And honestly, I mean, despite the fact that he may be the posek who is most capable of speaking to a Gentile audience, considering he was a law professor for many years, and um, you know, he teaches at Or Sameach, which is a Baal Tshuva yeshiva, which is a yeshiva for people were not raised religious. Um, at the same time, I have found that almost universally, when actual poskim talk about these things, they talk about it in a way that's almost completely incomprehensible to somebody without a very deep background in Judaism. And there's a lot of misunderstandings, and there were misunderstandings of what he was saying on my Discord server. Which is part of the reason I actually really liked the questions, the way the questions from. So, to explain who Rabbi Schwartz was, um, Rabbi Schwartz was a respected rabbi um, who was from Panovich Yeshiva, who was also, I believe, involved with the Nahal Haredi, the attempt for ultra-Orthodox Haredi people to be involved in the Israeli Defense Forces. God have mercy on our souls. And he, so when there was an attempt to revive the Sanhedrin, which now is completely, I mean, I think the project completely fell apart, but there was an attempt to make it happen. The Sanhedrin set up a rabbinic court to answer questions from Noahides, and Rabbi Schwartz was the head of that rabbinic court. And so he apparently wrote a pamphlet, which I have not seen, and he made an effort to answer a lot of questions from Noahides. There's also the book Sheva Mitzvot Hashem, which I finally ordered. I haven't received it yet, but the first first 50 pages are easily accessible online. And I mean, it's supposed to be a Shulchan Aruch for Noahides. It's been translated as the Divine Code, but I don't think it's accessible at all. I haven't seen the Divine Code. I think Chezi has a copy.
How does it compare to Rav Shirky's work?
I haven't seen Rav Shirky's work.
Well, since who was it, Bill? Someone had asked me to look into something for him, and I found that this was new since I last looked. Previously, Rav Shirky's stuff you had to order from Israel, and it's not expensive, but it's like $30-$40 a book, and he has Sidurim, and he has Sakban Halacha, and he has some general stuff, but there's like 12 different things that they've published, and almost all of them available in like all the major languages, like 12, 15 major languages. But over COVID, it looks like they started making ebooks available. So I bought his English version of the Noahides Sidor for $6, which I thought was pretty reasonable. And it looks like the Halacha one is similar. I haven't actually bought it and read it yet. I've only just started flipping through the Sidor like a week ago. But now that there's ebooks available that are pretty cheap and in English and French and Russian and Spanish, French, Russian, Spanish. What else did he have? I can't remember.
By the way, Ryan, I just sent you the link if you want to jump on. It might be good to have an actual Noahide on.
I would mention that Rabbi Shirky's he called it his little Shulchan Aruch that he prepared. It's all relative, obviously, but it's quite extensive. And he mentions over there, he really mentions in the footnote a lot of the different shitas, which he also mentions where shitas being opinions, the various opinions out there, and he mentions where there is people are being less or more stringent. He also focuses on, and this sort of dovetails into the conversation, but his whole move making such a booklet is also indicating that it's sort of on a spectrum and there's room to be doing more. I preface this, and this is really the whole conversation, which is he mentions about finding, a selech harav, finding yourself a rabbi, and then going according to that rabbi, unless you have reason to think that rabbi either doesn't know this subject or is leading you astray, and that would sort of give you the flexibility to sort of move through the various different opinions, which is true also for Jews. Which is there's a lot of very open and loose conversation, specifically with Jacob as well, like on these channels where there's various different ideas and opinions being discussed.
And I will say, Rav Schwartz, I told Jacob, I only got through about half of it before this, but I told him I'm very surprised by a lot of his rulings. He's very, very strict on a lot of things that I've not heard other people take those positions on. He seems, I don't know if he's a dat yachid. I don't know if he's a single minority opinion and he's a big, he's a guy who knows a lot of Torah, who has a lot of wisdom. And it's not like he isn't someone one can rely on. In fact, it was censored Jacob specifically because he is someone one can rely on. But it was very interesting to me to see some of his positions because they were far more strict than I would have than I've seen for
in certain ways.
In certain ways, especially
on Shabbat, he's very lenient.
But especially his willingness to apply rabbinic statute to Noahides, which is normally considered not a no-go because very specifically because rabbis only can rule for Jews but when they're ruling for Jews, they only are ruling for Jews, and they are not considered unless they're specifically asked to rule for non-Jews. It's not generally assumed that that's what they're doing. He also is willing to make rulings from Midrash and potentially Kabbalah slightly. I was trying to pick up if I saw any of those threads. Of course, this time of year, sitting in my sukkah where I don't put on tefillin, I'm one time a year I'm a chassid. But that's why one of the few halachic issues we decide by Kabbalah. But I know there's a movement, and I wish I had it saved. One of these guys, like a real Rosh Hashiva, talking in English at some point about things, was talking about the midrash about the Beit Midrash of Shem and Aver. And said something, and Chezi, you probably know the reference if I say it. So he said something along the lines of the only thing that they taught in the Beit Midrash Shem and Aver was Kabbalah, which is really interesting because there's an idea that the thing that's not allowed to be taught to non-Jews potentially, or one of the major areas of Torah not allowed to be taught to non-Jews, is parts of the oral law that are esoteric and mystical, like Kabbalah. And this rabbi flipped it on his head and said that was the only thing that was taught because that is universal mysticism, which everyone has access to in a way that specific specification don't.
So you have to understand. Okay, so you have to understand the different shitas on that. So the question is, we have the Talmud, which hopefully one day we will learn, which says that a Gentile is not allowed to learn Torah, except for those things which are his type of Torah, like Torah that applies in his life. And when he learns Torah that applies in his life, he is like a high priest in the temple. Right. So the question becomes, what is something that applies to a Gentile, and if, I mean, obviously love and fear of God apply to Gentiles. And
Yes.
if you hold that Kabbalah is really only the study of those two mitzvot, which Chassidus does,
Mm-hmm.
then
it would be a fair game. Also, if it's about human psychology, if it's about, but even if you take the view, I mean, here's a more expansive option. If the Bible is really as recursive as Jonathan Peugeot would have us believe, no, just kidding. We already have that idea, but he likes to think he came up with it because he won't source it. So if it's really recursive and fractal and all those fun things, then is there any part of Torah that isn't affecting every other part of Torah? Is there anything that's not applicable?
Rav Schwartz, it seems that's where he goes on at length about it being prohibited for a Gentile to talk about things before creation.
So I think we should first frame it, which there are a few issues. There's one is, who is this Noahide?
Yes.
And there's a few questions that we're going to have to, that are really going to affect how one interprets this, because there is, what is the Noahide? Is it on a spectrum? Because we're going to be introduced, as I'm sure you guys were, with there is the Noahide that sort of is, we call him a Noahide whether he's interested or not. Then there's the Noahide who decides to accept specifically all the 7. There's a Noahide that wants to accept all the 7 and wants to do more, but doesn't want to find himself as being a convert. And all of those different levels of commitment potentially have ramifications to what they can't observe and what they can't learn. And this distinction, which we're going to see also continues, really matters. Do we categorize Noahides wanting to keep more things, as in creating a new religion, which causes issues, or do we see them as, no, just good Noahides taking on more commandments? And I think with Jacob mistakenly sent me his original link of I'm forgetting the rabbi's name right now, who Jacob was not.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's even a rabbi.
See this one.
Yeah.
I saw you talking about it. Who did you send him?
Okay, so first of all, Billy and Donnie, I sent both of you links. You should both jump on, especially you, Donnie, because we can use an actual fourth member here who knows what halacha is.
I don't know.
There's a channel called Nativ, which generally has good stuff. But this one guy on there, he was saying that there's no shaila. It's perfectly clear that a Noahide is allowed to keep Shabbat. And like, once you're doing that, and then he starts reading Rav Schwartz and Rabbi Moshe Wiener as also agreeing with him, which they obviously don't.
I would mention, and I think he's a good example for that, which is, when you're speaking about this, and we have to remember that, like, this wasn't such a live conversation for 2,000 years. What's your vantage point now? He is very much saying, like, that's it. Like, he uses, like, the term the mother lode, like, we're at the next stage. And, like, he is being a lot more open with this concept, which you could cherry pick. And while others might be like, whoa, slow your roll. And that also has to do with where, as the Jewish people or the Jewish community, do we find ourselves. Like, even if we say, like, okay, great, we believe that this Noahide, his heart's in the right place. How do we socially and with our structure do we accept such a thing? So
okay, but Chazi, the fact that he was openly misrepresenting the situation in ways that are unacceptable is what got me that particular video. No, you can't say, there's no question.
Yeah.
So you are right when you're saying he needs to be discussing, like, for example, Rav Shirky comes and says, one of his notes are, there's also some people that would say you could do this, like you could observe the Shabbat, and there's comments to that, not saying like it's a wholesale, which, to be fair to this rabbi in Nativ, I think specifically about, I think he's talking about tefillin there, which he also seems to be more lenient about. The attitude is, you need to be smart about this, though. As in, even if it's permitted, that doesn't mean it's the right move for you to be doing this. And I think it's also very much a function of.
This is actually something I really wanted to get into.
We should. Can we back up for a second, though?
Sure.
I think we're getting like way far into the weeds here, and I don't want to like.
And in conclusion.
Yeah. In conclusion, go ahead. Conclude. Go
ahead.
So, I'm not even sure exactly where it's worth framing and bringing back to. I think part of this is there is this. Well, we can kind of put it in the frame of the Maimonidean Nachmanidean debate over the 7 Noahide laws and how much latitude there is, especially in the 7th law, and if that really expands into this whole other world. But we don't even have to necessarily do that. So that debate is, our Noahide courts, which is one of the 7 Noahide laws, is to set up a court system. Is the purpose of that court system just to enforce the other Noahide laws, which is the Maimonidean position, but only in the land of Israel, right? He's very strict about where they can enforce and how, and it's just this. It's only for Noahides who live in the land of Israel, who accept all the other things. Yeah.
Via Moses,
right. He's a positivist law. So you can't just say this is some sort of like natural wisdom, or I came to it on my own. Like, you have to accept it because it was given as revelation in the Torah to the Jews and from God. And if you accept all those things, that Moses is a real prophet, all those principles, then the courts enforce that set of laws, and that's it. Whereas the Nachmanidean position is that no, there's one of the rules is to set up a court system, and that's to enforce law in general, and that societies in general, all societies, not just Jewish societies, have a divine mandate to set up legal systems that are fair and just. Yes, that somehow are tied to monotheism and that stuff, but really are much more about kind of this, I mean, I'd say justice essentially, and but also like ensuring that society runs properly. And this debate can sort of be seen in some of the debates over natural law versus positivist law. So natural law being, okay, this is how the world is, that people can figure out of reason, rationality, science, whatever, and come up with rules, kind of deriving all their oughts from ises, perhaps, or maybe a prioris if you're Kantian, Descartesian.
Okay, I want to keep this on individual person can do, what should they do?
Yes.
Okay, so let's not get too far.
Let's not get too far. But I think part of this is, so for instance, the issue of tzedakah. Everyone agrees that non-Jews have an obligation to give charity. There are multiple ways to derive that from. None of them are from a Noahide law. Some of them link it back to the 7th law of courts. Some of it link it back to an idea that that of natural law. Like everyone, like the Sadia Gaon says, it's natural law. People just know that giving charity is right. Some people link it back very clearly to examples in the Bible where God seems to tell through Ezekiel, he says one of the sins of Sodom was they didn't give charity and they didn't care for their poor. Right? There's midrashim that can do it. There's direct text proofs. There's all these ways to frame this, and they're all legitimate in their own ways, and they kind of all overlap, and they all do things. There's no question that this is an obligation. The question just is, is there one good framework for this? I see Dominic says natural law is true. Complicated because there's two different versions of natural law that Noahide law could fall under according to the Babylonian Talmud. So one is social contract, and one is kind of nature evolutionary theory stuff. Essentially, and that's like a big difference. Yes.
I would just mention over here, which is also which is sort of like a double-edged sword or ironic over here, which is
your microphone is really loud, Ryan.
Oops, my bad.
And in Yeshuv Olam, we know that the Gentiles have this commandment, basically, or their understanding, which is why some would say that they can't keep the Shabbat or observe the Shabbat, is because they have to maintain this never-ending cycle, basically, of productivity, which then there's a separate discussion whether Jews are commanded about this or not on their remaining 6 days. Either way, that also relates sort of to the court system, because generally speaking, you are being thrusted into a holy rat race that needs to be continuous, and that also has in it built into that system is building roads, making sure people are going to be healthy,
But part
etc.,
of my
etc.
point here was the Sabbath. Some arguments for keeping Shabbat that I've seen for Noahides are, and the Rashi argument is essentially that it is kind of natural law because it is part of built into creation. There is a 7th day of rest, and in fact, in the Midrashim, Moses discovers the Shabbat independently. Right? He asks Pharaoh for one day every 7 days off. He derives this rationally according to the Midrash, and then when we say every Saturday morning in our prayers, the present that you gave Moses, which seems to should be the 10 Commandments, the Midrash actually reads that, and especially Rashi, specifically on the Midrash, reads that as that you and basically said that what he discovered through his natural law wisdom, whatever, you then revealed as being like this eternal kind of transcendent rule of the universe for Jews. So there is this tension there.
There are 2 concepts, maybe 3, that I want to introduce here. First is Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah. There is a there is a way of looking at halacha, which is okay. We start with it's a good idea to do good things and a bad idea to do bad things, and the world to continue, and God created the world and all these things. And we should not allow the discussion of the individual laws to kind of allow us to completely forget that framework. And that's part of, okay, yeah, the question is, why does a Noahide have to give charity? But we all realize that Noahide has to give charity. Or why does a Noahide have to respect their parents? But we all recognize that they do.
That's not the only question. I think Schwartz was good at pulling this out because part of, I think, his application of rabbinic statute to Noahides, ideally, is because, especially in the areas around marriage, let's say, or something, is because he recognizes that a lot of the rules, most of the tractates around marriage and divorce and engagement, that in the Talmud, for instance, a lot of those statutes and protections are very much like they're very easy to argue from a rational societal protection basis, where like these are just common sense, smart things to do. And yes, we can argue about like this exact wording here or there, or whatever. But for the most part, these are, how do we figure out how to protect certain groups of people, certain individuals, certain weird situations from happening, and like how do we resolve those tensions? And a lot of these takanot, especially, which I'm not saying the oral law tradition is huge, but part of that oral law tradition is creating these statutes that essentially just help the world run, and that included very much the Jewish world. But that wisdom is just as applicable for Jews and non-Jews, assuming some of the base parameters still hold. Now, obviously, if you're working outside of certain things, like how a Jewish divorce works, then not all of that stuff is going to work because some of it is very particular, but not all of it is. And I think in part what I see him is he's extending things there.
The second thing I really do want to add is, while it may seem initially that the Noahide laws don't seem that hard, anytime you're dealing with halacha, like stealing, right? It saying it's not that hard just means you haven't thought about it long enough. And frankly, I've said this to rabbis as well, who are like, yeah, okay, so the Noahide laws are, what do we need to give guidance on? And it's like, no, that's not true. And the third concept I want to add is a lot of, especially people who come from a Christian background, have this idea of all or nothing. Now that I am, and if I consider myself a Noahide, now I have to do everything, or it's a no-go. And frankly, one of the most important things I have seen is rabbis have started actually saying, okay, when a Noahide accepts to keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, even before a rabbinic court, we expect he's going to probably sin at least in some way afterwards, right? This isn't an all or nothing thing. This is something where we expect people to live to a standard that actually is a lot higher than people realize. When you look at the what Rabbi Schwartz says about Ever Minachai, he's actually very, very stringent. He to the point where he's a dat yachid. I believe he's a dat yachid.
What's he hold?
He holds that because most animals are killed not by shechting them, that the liver is still moving after the animal's been killed, and so intestines and livers of non-shechted animals, of animals that aren't certified kosher, are not kosher for a Noahide. That's going way. I mean,
just their livers and intestines.
He gives. I can pull it up.
By the way, so we should be clear. So the prohibition against lymph from a living animal is really complicated. Speaking of many complicated halacha things, because it doesn't. There are positions that hold it doesn't apply at all to anything but mammals, kosher mammals specifically.
Yes, and he does agree with that.
So it wouldn't apply to pigs, wouldn't apply to crabs.
No. So he says mammals. Okay. So
there's a position that says mammals. There's another position that says only kosher mammals, which is interesting.
Right. So he says, where was it? Nearly all meat for human consumption today comes from animals that have been killed for eating. However, some slaughterhouses detach parts of the animal before the animal has stopped flexing its limbs. If a Noahide is not sure about the source of the meat, it is advised that he buy the meat from a person who he can trust in order to remove all doubt. Where did it say about? One should therefore not eat. There are various methods for killing the animal that are intended for human consumption. Some of them present no problem, but others would call into question the permissibility of eating the above-mentioned organs, which this refers to all parts that are attached to the trachea and esophagus and includes the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines. Because I guess they eviscerate the animal before it stops moving.
Yeah, it was interesting because normally I think he's the only one who has this position, because normally we understand that non-Jews have no prohibitions against how they kill the animal. They can hunt, they can do whatever. I mean, as long as the animal's dead. The question is like, what's dead, I guess, here.
So apparently he's
saying it's movement.
He's saying because it's still moving, when they eviscerate it, then it's becomes a thing. And I have to say, the one clear example of Ever Minachai, which apparently takes place these days, is when they geld calves, bulls. They people often then go on to cook these severed testicles, and I would say, according to all opinions, that is completely forbidden to a Noahide.
In addition, because there's a debate over the 8th and 9th Noahide laws, which includes
gelding,
castrating
animals,
any animals, including humans. There would be another potential issue. It could be 2 Noahide laws that could be at stake here. But it is worth mentioning here the Rebbe's opinion, because the Rebbe, right, is going to go in the opposite direction. He's going to say, well, yes, there's might be this very narrow application of the maybe Torah prohibition at stake. In general, the Rebbe then goes very expansive and says, this is an entire category of animal welfare laws that need to be implemented, and that cruelty to animals is not allowed, experimentation on animals that isn't directly life-saving is not allowed, so no makeup, like animal things, probably, except for
boiling lobsters before
boiling lobsters.
So
boiling live lobsters or crabs aren't allowed, right? He expands this to a huge category into what I would consider kind of like rabbinic law. It's basically the equivalent parallel to what we would call rabbinic law. But yeah, it's really fascinating because we have this huge issue.
Yosef, I would say, Jonathan, welcome.
Yeah,
Yosef, I would say that instead of getting down, which we can, in the nitty gritty of, let's say, for example, as far as cruelty to animals, first of all, that's also what Shirky holds. He has a lot more expansive attitude about this. And about, the study of Torah, it would be that even if you're studying the Torah about the quote unquote things that are permitted, if there's a category over there that you don't know, then you're going to have to open up the Mishnah and the Gemara about that category. And then, it's sort of a Pandora's box, so to speak, in the positive sense. And again, this, from a high level perspective, I think we need to go back and say, look, who are these Noahides and how are they walking around? Like, as in, if it's a small little group, then I think it's safe to stick within the 7 bubble, which is like very specific things. As it expands and as there's communities and as there's Noahide rabbis, which to us seems like sort of like fiction. However, specifically for us in these kind of conversations, it becomes a lot more palpable. Then the real questions start with, okay, 1 second. If this is an actual mode, were the forefathers, were they Noahides or were they not Noahides? And who are they and what's their relationship? And then there's okay, Noahides are real and it's a legit relationship that God is looking to have. And if that's the case, we go all the way to, and this is sort of the tension that Jacob was bringing up. We have this high priest level Noahide that has accepted a lot of things and is doing a lot of things. Who is this dude that is not Jewish also? And like he's doing, and then that starts getting, we start getting into the weeds a little with, do we then look at this as, is this a new religion, or it could only be recognized as a kosher Noahide if there's a sense of, let's say, a kosher Jewish community, because they both need each other, they need each other to feed off of. Because if you have this like mix of, you have like this new thing being developed, which no one really knows the rules, you're going to see people are being a lot more strict. I can't have people running around keeping something that really looks like Shabbat, but this guy's keeping it because, his intentions are, he's not doing it because God commanded, he's doing it to receive a reward, not because he's commanded to do so. So obviously those are nuances that, again, I think they get stressed based on where we are as a community.
Let me set out something that I did on the Discord that I thought was valuable, which is there are various levels of what you can call a Noahide. Now, Rabbi Steinsaltz, to some extent, seems to be thinking that every single Gentile, anyone who's not Jewish, really is a Noahide and really is bound by this, and and he goes so far as to discuss whether or not Hindus can be considered under the Noahide laws. Then there's a step up, I would say, from that, which is Christianity and Islam, at the very least, no, there's a God of Israel who gave commandments to Moses, and that already, I muted your mic, Billy, but you can turn it back on whenever you want. It was just echoing. So they already are in a different category because they accept the Torah, they accept that to some extent, and Moses, and that there is a God of Israel. then you have somebody who goes before an actual rabbinic court, even if it's an ad hoc rabbinic court, which is before any three religious Jews, really, Jewish males, and accepts being a Noahide. And then there's someone who actually goes before a genuine rabbinic court, and that person is a ger toshav. That person has certain rights because of this, as a member of the Jewish community. And frankly, I mean, looking at some of the news of things that have been happening in Israel, frankly, it kind of makes me wish that some of the Christian communities would actually go before a rabbinic court, so that there would be a religious obligation to defend their rights from a Jewish point of view.
Well, there might already be, but they're not recognizing the level it exists at, and they would have a much stronger position to claim protections or to really go to Haredi leaders and push back. Because right now, just to come and claim Mipnei Darchei Shalom is clearly not working, which is what they're doing. So there's a even for non-Noahides, there is a very basic tenet of Jewish non-Jews relations that should apply to any non-Jews, doesn't matter what they keep, what they do, of this principle, Mipnei Darchei Shalom, that we don't do things that increase animosity in the world, especially between Jews and non-Jews, but even just as individuals, forget like at this social like group level.
Rabbi Breitowitz actually brought the non-Maimonidean way of looking at Darkei Shalom, which is, well, there is one way of looking at Darkei Shalom, which I think most people it's like, we don't want you to kill us, so we won't kill you. And that reciprocity is pretty good. But there is I believe he said it was Nachmanides, but certainly the Meiri is, and frankly, I would say this is the majority opinion. I think is Darkei Shalom means Rodef Shalom. It means that we as Jews have an obligation to increase civilization and peace on earth. And so Darkei Shalom is not merely a self-defensive thing, but also a positive requirement of being a Jew is to increase peace in the world.
I will tell you that Rabbi Aryeh Klapler, who is mono-Orthodox, but I think a pretty good, reasonable voice in this part of the world, has made an argument that Mipnei Darchei Shalom is a meta-halachic principle that has to be considered in general psak. And so he takes it. I don't know if it's necessarily further, but he frames it as this is one of the things that like all rabbis who are issuing any halachic decision need to be considering. And it's this much more expansive. And honestly, I don't know if it's the majority opinion. It's the majority Ashkenazi position, though. And I think that's Ramban, Nachmanides, and the Meiri are getting this. They're in Provence and in northern Spain, but they're getting it because they're so close to the French, the Tosafists, who hold this position as the standard position.
Look, it's a pasuk. Darcheha darchei Noam, kol netivetei shalom. The ways of the Torah are darchei Noam.
One could also argue that it has to do with the difference between living in a Christian versus a Muslim context and the history of the 13th and 14th centuries when these guys are writing. But yes, in general, I agree with you that is, we don't have to take a sourceless approach, and it's probably better to take the Ashkenazi position, the mainstream Ashkenazi position here, that some of the major Sfardim also done.
I wanna try, if we can, again, like I'm going towards this point of tension that we have, as Jacob mentioned, we have a person going through the process of conversion, and we tell this person to not observe the Shabbat, or have this, you must at some point of your on your Shabbat experience violate. On the other hand, we're seemingly there is a sense where a Noahide could keep his Noahide position, his status, while still keeping the Shabbat. And the reason I think there's this tension that's not necessarily answered, at least I didn't find a good answer for it, is because there was only one reality the Jewish community was dealing with. And it really is a sense where we have to sort of play it by ear and see where is this spectrum, because we have laws which is like, okay, these are time bound laws, so men do need to, women don't need to. So there's a whole another category that I know Heights could fall into, just that it just wasn't developed enough culturally. I think that you might have enough meat there with regards to raw data that rabbis could play around with, but right now we're still looking at this in a very early stage where we're just playing around with the information. Some say they can, some say they can't. There's heavy hitters on either side.
So let me flip this a little bit then to work.
Sure.
So saying there's one reality, but it's like kind of this amorphous whatever. Maybe it's really the other way, that because this wasn't practical and it was essentially a theoretical discussion for the rabbis who are having this in the ones we're talking about. We're not talking about the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century when there may still have been something like God-fearing communities.
Right.
In the period of the 10th through 14th century, when most of these big debates are happening, there's too many opinions from too many big people like Rashi, Tosafot, Rambam, Ravid, all at the same time, and because there's no feedback, there's no practical feedback, there's no because they're not actually dealing with real life. They were never forced to converge on a single solution. So which in some ways is great. In some ways that means that there's actually more options and there's a range of potential shitot positions that might be viable, and we'll see what happens when this actually gets plugged in pragmatically. One, for instance, I think the Maimonidean position, even though for many years it was, I'd say, considered this is the standard, and the Maimonides, because of his role in Jewish halacha, and central, obviously, in many ways for good reason. But he's also, he's very much a pragmatic empiricist. At the end of the day, he's a medical guy, and he would have loved actual probably feedback and implementation to see how things panned out and worked. I think with a lot of his system, he sometimes writes and he's also writing, and again in a very specific context, and persecution, Islam being forced to move, right? He has a lot of stuff going on in his life, dealing with a destroyed country of Israel after the Crusades. He can't even live there; it's so bad. He has to move to Egypt, but his position, while it sort of serves as the default baseline where we're all if we consider alternatives, there are always alternatives from his position. In some ways, his is some of the hardest positions to reconcile with practicality in a world that actually has no eyes.
So one of the reasons I decided to buy Rabbi Weiner's book was what I did not realize, and honestly, I have to say this is a bracha for a blessing that God did for the Noahides, is that the Rogachover and the Brisker Rav seem to have had a very in-depth discussion about Maimonides and disagreements about what exactly Maimonides was saying in those chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the Brisker Rav and the Rogachover apparently wrote quite in-depth things.
So context, 19th century, so pretty recent, but still not current rabbis who are not necessarily dealing with a huge Noahide reality, though there actually seems to be movements along those lines, even in their days in the late 19th century. The Brisker Rav being the grandfather of Rabbi Soloveitchik, who we read his books in our book club sometimes on his Jacob's channel. The Rogachover, who actually is the only person in history who shares my name, the other Yosef Raisin, is
so he gave he was the one who ordained the Rebbe,
a child prodigy who then went on to do great things. Yeah.
and he was very very famous. But like the fact that like the Brisker Rav and the Rogachover discussed these things, these were two of the great luminaries of Judaism at the time. They apparently spent quite a bit of time talking about these things. So there is, and Rabbi Schwartz, I mean, I have to say, a lot of the things he said were surprising. Rabbi Breitowitz, a lot of the things that he said were surprising to me. There is a
You don't
real
have it yet,
discussion going
but
on.
you should buy Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's book on the 7 Laws of Noah, where
Okay.
where I know Chezi and I both have it, where he goes through the 613 commandments of the Jews, and he actually shows how the 7 Laws of Noah are really categories that comprise at least 60 of the 613, potentially up to 69. He shows all the debates between the Ravid, Maimonides, Nachmanides, and Tosafot and Rashi in that, and like which of those exact numbers, whatever. But it's really useful because he goes through each mitzvah of the 613 or whatever that might be connected and shows like where the debates are, cites their sources in the Talmud, in the codes. It's short, and he wrote it before he went to Israel, if I remember. Initially, he drafted it, and it was gone over by Rav Soloveitchik. So it has some like, and Rav Soloveitchik like encouraged him to publish it. So like it's it's like 120 pages. It's not long. It also quotes extensively from the Ben Mazog correspondences, which were
Eliyahu Ben,
Eliyahu Ben Mazog, who was an Italian rabbi, an Sephardi Italian rabbi, who was actively trying to help a Noahide community, and specifically, he was talking to who was he talking to in a lot of those letters? Anyway, there's this extensive correspondence from the 1920s or 10s from Eliyahu Ben Mazog with the Italian Noahide community at the time. There was actually a pretty flourishing Noahide community in Europe until World War II.
I just want to say, Rabbi Mullet, I just emailed you a link if you have time to jump on. Yeah. I also want to give the actual Noahides time to like ask questions. And,
so if you guys watch the video,
yeah.
So I have one question that's kind of off topic, but I'm in Manhattan right now, and there's Chabadniks all over Times Square with a lemon and looks like a giant asparagus, and they have like a preternatural ability to like sniff out the Jews in the group, the secular, like the people that they're just like, you're Jewish, and they like get it right every time. They're like, how does he know I'm Jewish? And what are they trying to get them to do?
They're trying to get them to shake and probably make a bracha and then shake the blessing and then shake the lulav and etrog. So in the Bible, in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus, there's this description of this holiday of Sukkot where I'm sitting in my booth here, right? So
good for you.
So one of the other commandments of that holiday is to take these 4 species, which the rabbis identify as the citron, which is the lemon-looking thing, a palm branch. So Palm Sunday, if you ever go to Rome, you'll see, or other Catholic places where they have processions of palms.
Yeah.
New York City, you'll see them. So you have the palm in the middle, and then on either side there's 3 myrtle branches and 2 willow branches. So that's the asparagus. And they have all these symbolisms and all this, and we can unpack it. But essentially, there's whatever the symbolism might be, and we can talk about that. The commandment in the Torah is that Jews should take these 4 species, put them together. The rabbis learn that means to shake them and bind them and shake them. And this is, this pretty critical commandment for this holiday.
So my secular-ish, I'm just assuming coworker who was Jewish, like told me all about a little bit of the situation with the fruit and how the rabbis have to like figure out like the ones that aren't grafted. Like he knew a bit about that. And I was spitting some Noahide game. He wasn't up on it, but like when I talked to some of my Jewish coworkers who are, not particularly religious, their minds are blown by the Noahide phenomenon. They're like, "What? Wait, you're a what? You're a Gentile, and like all this stuff, and like they're and they're like, oh, I have family that's Orthodox. Like it awakens something in some of these folks. It really does.
Wonderful.
And I'm like, yeah, well, get on it. You're like we get up on the hill. So anyway, that's my
Yes, thank you, Rabbi Mullah. I was trying to, rabbinically learned that that's.
Bill, I want you to jump in on this also if you have any comments. I just want to say what Jonathan just said. There's two ways to read into that when I hear him say that that their minds are blown. One is that's the exact thing that we're worried about someone getting confused and saying that like this is a new religion, because they're not, like, unfortunately, even within the Orthodox community, people are not well versed enough with this where this could catch them off guard, and this is part of the problem. Number two, being more optimistic, and just as generally also my interaction when I discuss with people, let's say the Noahide movement, people are their minds are blown, but they're very excited about it as well. And I give an example of, well, this could all be just Photoshop. I mean, like just for photo op purposes. When Israelis or Jews see, let's say, the peace deals that are being sort of thrown out there right now with like Saudi Arabia, it's like so exciting for people like Israelis to see on TV, because it's almost miraculous to think about. Are you telling me that you want to be part of the Jewish people, but like not a convert, and you're not against us, and this is all like hunky dory? Like, there's never been a situation like that in Israel that everyone's like, oh, they just want to join you. They're like really into this group. So I think people are excited because it sounds like it sounds like sort of like a messianic times. And on the flip side, hence the concern, because like I said again. Sorry, go ahead.
I have to say, several people just think that like Noahides worship Jews, right? And like especially when Antonio was trying to find somebody to marry him, like to do the marriage ceremony, and so people were like, well, what if he can't find a Jew? And I'm like, well, he doesn't have to necessarily find a Jew. A Gentile can also do the marriage ceremony. The Noahide community really should be, I mean, to some extent at least, self-sufficient. It is not necessary that there be Jews that are involved in every Noahide community, especially if the so Ryan says, hey, only Christians worship a Jew.
I mean, I guess, I'm sorry, Bill, if you wanted to share anything.
Yeah, so I missed a good portion of this because I was putting my kids to bed, but there's a few caveats I want to put with this. I think a separate Noahide community is not ideal. I if it's a community that's separated, by a couple 100 miles, I can understand that, and I think there should be tighter restrictions on what that community does. But we all have to have religious practice. It seems to me, at least what's in the public view of what you hear rabbis and people talking about, is what you're supposed to do. Here's the laws, here's the things, and that's it. There's a religious element to it. Your kids have to see it. There's a practice that has to be done, or it will not hold. If your kids don't see spiritual fruit running through you, if the people around you don't see it, what you're doing is not going to hold multiple generations. That's one thing that I hear Jacob and a lot of other people use against, other religious groups is this going to hold? Well, if you don't have religious practice and we're just following ideas, it's no different than following, one of the Greek philosophers from 2,000 years ago, right? I found this idea, I like it, and so I'm going to go with it. But if there's no spiritual connectivity there, then it I don't see how it lasts. But I also, without making it a new religion, how do you do it as separate from a synagogue, separate from Jewish people, right? And the other thing I would say to this, I've heard a lot of people say, is how do you figure out who a Noahide is versus who isn't? Well, just like the Jewish people are set apart from everybody, I also think that someone who is following after God, regardless if they're Jewish or not, they also have to be set apart in some way. They have to be distinguishable from the rest of the world in a small way, not like a Jew is, because we have different jobs to do. We have different things we have to do. We have different. We just have different callings, right? But we still have to be set apart. And I hope all that makes sense.
Billy, did you get a chance? I mean, I don't know if I even sent it. I thought I put it on the Discord server to take a look at what Rabbi Schwartz, the question and answers from Rabbi Schwartz.
Yeah, I read it and I went searching for the Rashi quote as well. So it made a lot of sense, and it did separate. It put a good distinction on, okay, these practices are visibly different from Jewish practices, and I thought was good. What I have an issue with is I want to hear a rabbinical court say this. I want 10, 12 post-ex. I want a group of people to say this is good, because see, you'll have one guy says, okay, that's fine. Another guy, oh no, that's not fine.
Well,
And you're liable to death because you read, I heard a rabbi the other day. I
we
heard a
all want
rabbi
this.
the other I'm sorry.
We all Jews want this. We wish we had a Sanhedrin. We don't have a Sanhedrin. There's no
Yeah,
central Judaism.
I'm sorry. But I heard a rabbi the other day say it's okay to read Maimonides. It's okay to read the Mishnah Torah, and you should read it every day. And then I've heard other rabbis say you're liable to death for theft for reading it. So, it's very confusing. And I understand your point. It's we can't, if y'all don't have it, we can't have it.
Okay, so I have to say, Rabbi Schwartz, first of all, was the head of a rabbinic court when he said this, and a rabbinic court appointed by what was the best attempt at a Sanhedrin we've had in the past 2,000 years.
400 years.
400 years at least. So, I mean, and another thing you have to understand is rabbis throw around this liable for death thing a little bit too loosey-goosey. And some people really don't understand. So in Judaism, we talk about things in terms of their severity, but and some things are more severe than others. But that's in order to help you understand the relative importance of them, not because we're actually going to be putting anyone to death. Chas v'shalom. But yeah, I certainly hear what you're saying. And it does kind of go back to what Chezi started with regarding, okay, so for a Jew, at least we have a general majority opinion, and so people can go according to a majority opinion. There isn't much of a majority opinion that's been formed, really. And there are various rabbis who are discussing certain things, and there is something where you have to realize that relying on a rabbi when you have a difficult situation is okay. I mean, so I actually, the Shabbat thing, I asked Rabbi Breitowitz particularly because you were asking, Billy, and Rabbi Breitowitz, I believe, sent me that link to what Rabbi Schwartz had to say, because it isn't what Rabbi Breitowitz himself would say. Rabbi Schwartz's reading of Rashi. I went and looked up the Rashi. I haven't learned that. I believe it's in Yevamot. I haven't learned that part of the Talmud myself. And he has a particular reading which is not clearly the reading of Rashi that everybody else necessarily would have. But Rabbi Schwartz is somebody with the shoulders that if you want to follow what he says, you have what to rely on. And so that's part of the thing I actually thought was most important for us to make clear is this halachic process of realizing, okay, there are various opinions, and within those opinions, the way one of my rabbis in yeshiva put it was, okay, everybody, wears a suit, but nobody tells you the color of the suit. Nobody tells you what kind of tie you have to wear and this is in the Haredi community where everyone wears a suit. Guess what? There are plenty of Jewish communities where nobody wears a suit. And this is one of the biggest, so the only channel that I can really endorse, there's an Australian woman who has My Noahide Family. It's a wonderful, wonderful channel, except for the one thing of she has her rabbi and she goes according to her rabbi and she doesn't know anything outside her rabbi, and which is perfectly fine for her. Perfectly fine for her. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily need to follow the things that her rabbis taught. And Rabbi Shochat of blessed memory, he had a certain view. Rabbi Shulman, who's on Tanakh Talk, he has his views on what is permissible and not permissible for Noahides. And it's fine to pick the rabbi you like the most, as long as it's a genuine rabbi.
So I'll add one thing here, though. I think, right, that there's a difference in that, for instance, I keep kashrut according to an Orthodox standard, but it is different than what for let's say meat slaughter and checking for some things in the animals, what Sephardim would hold, right? There's a type of kosher that's different for that type of meat. It's called, usually called klak Yosef, right? And we Ashkenazim generally historically have not held that. So I feel very comfortable in that. I don't have to ask my rabbi, that I have to follow that because my community for hundreds, if not 1,000 years, has been following this position. Noahide communities don't have that historical memory. So it's a little different in that, while there's some things in gray areas where I definitely would have to ask a rabbi that come up, a lot of the stuff I rely on, I don't necessarily have to ask about because there is consensus, at least for me in my world, being American, Ashkenazi, modern Orthodox, whatever it is, all these different containers that we can kind of loop. And they all have their own history. Some of them have 100-year-old history. Some of them have 50-year-old history. Some of them have 500-year-old history, 1,000. Noahides don't have that. So even though, yes, it is true that what Jacob is saying, that at the end of the day, a lot of this is you pick a rabbi and you have a relationship with that rabbi. And in my little Ashkenazi, modern Orthodox American bubble, I will pick a rabbi and generally go by exactly what that person says. If they're and they'll tell me if they're not an expert in one area of halacha, they'll tell me, talk to this other guy because I trust him, and this is a good expert. Or maybe he'll give me a couple options, whatever. Or I can just find someone else on my own for that area. But generally, it's very much about it's very personal. It's very much about you're committing personally. It's a relationship like any other, like a spouse, like a best friend. Making yourself a rabbi, which is a dictum from the Mishnah, is this very personal process of commitment where you're deciding, like, I'm going to trust this person with my spiritual well-being. And that, if they say that this does not incur the death penalty and I'm okay doing this and whatever, I'm going to trust that they know enough. Do your research. Don't just pick a random rabbi off the street. Like, as Rabbi Mullet just said in the comments here, not all rabbis are knowledgeable about all these topics. And right. Yeah. So make sure you do your research, but you pick someone. That's what Jacob is saying. And if this rabbi your rabbi that you pick, who does know a lot about Noahide law, let's say, hopefully, but doesn't agree with my Noahide family woman's rabbi, that's allowed, and that's okay, because until we have a Sanhedrin, that's going to be how the Jewish and Noahide world basically works. But we should also recognize there's a disadvantage because Noahides do not have historical precedent. They don't have the hundreds of years of kind of accumulated wisdom on practicality of rulings and kind of feedback and what rulings held, and were able to be held by the nation, right? I mean, Jacob, this is a principle I know you feel very strongly about, that rulings that people can't actually follow do not become binding is a principle in rabbinic law. It is not actually clear if it applies to Noahides. It's worth clarifying that.
Yeah.
But for us, at least, if it's not practically implemented, then it can't actually be law, obviously. So that's a very practical kind of legal question. But this, we don't have that yet for Noahides. So this gets to what Chezi was saying, is until we have the reality on the ground and we can get some convergence, there is a disadvantage. And the best kind of wisdom at the moment, in some ways, is pick a rabbi who is knowledgeable in this stuff, at least theoretically at the moment. There is a range of possibilities. Hopefully they'll pick if you trust them, then they'll be in the range for you, hopefully. And as this gets worked out on larger and larger scales in community, in reality, over time, like all three of those scales, we'll hopefully see some convergence around these issues, presuming that, we all trust in hands that are, shoulders that are greater than ours.
I would also mention, I'm in agreement with everything that Yosef said. I would mention that that again, this is sort of a, if you build it, they will come sort of situation where it seems out of context. If one Noahide is doing something, he's going to get confused by the people around him. If there's a group of 2,000 Noahides doing something, then that changes the outlook, and that changes the reality, and that also then changes how a rabbi would decree about a specific scenario. So this is really sort of getting developed as we go along, and this also relates to one's study of Torah, right? And I was mentioning a spectrum. There's you find yourself as, I'm the passive Noahide. I'm gonna allow myself to be determined based on Jewish law, and then they say, okay, you're considered a Noahide now. But as we see in the literature, there's a Noahide that then stands in front of a court of three, and there's a Noahide that decides to take on more and more things. Those, as that specific Noahide or that specific community starts developing, the halacha forms around them accordingly as well. And there's a Talmud saying which talks about the redemption, and it mentions it says beita chishena lo beita lo chishena, as in the quickening of the redemption and the coming of the Messiah could happen immediately, and it could also be a very long process. And there's interpretations of looking at as options for us. So, this route could be a long route, or it could be a route that happens very, very quickly, and these things start finding clarification. We started this conversation, Bill, with saying how, Yosef and I both have this book by Rabbi Lichtenstein about the 7 laws, and that's an older book. There's now the book that Rav Shirky has, which at the time would have been like very controversial to be coming out with a book that has broken down all the references, where you should be looking for all of these different expansions on the 7 Noahide laws, which clearly, if you have a book like that, the assumption is that you also have a learning group where you could be learning Maimonides and all these different elements. So I'm going to end this little rant with, you were talking about the different opinions. There's an opinion where one should have his fringes on his garments, his tzitzit, showing. And there are opinions that these fringes cannot be showing and they must be tucked away. And the rabbis, very wide shoulders who have the differing opinions, both use very, very harsh language. So a move some people do is is they do both. They expose some of the fringe, and then they tuck it back into their pants. And their attitude is, this way I'm living both lives, so to speak. Now that could seem like you're playing a game. On the other hand, that is someone that is trying to really do the best he can to walk the line. So I would tell a Noahide, here too, you could potentially use some of these tools if you feel comfortable, which is, there is what I'm telling, the kind of conversation I'm having to Noahide X. And then I have an inner group which we're doing something else right now where I could feel comfortable expressing myself why. Again, all happening with the guidance of a rabbi. But as you develop, there are new versions of Bill developing every day as well. And those new versions of Bill, with his new levels of commitment and relationship with God, literally put him in a new status, which could then put him in a new halachic status as well.
Okay, Antonio hasn't gotten to talk yet. Let's get him.
Let's get him to talk. Speak, Antonio.
While he does that, let me answer. Rabbi Mollet says Rashi's comment on the Talmud on the subject, Shabbat and Noahide, are not lahalacha. He is a yachid. I have to say, Rabbi Schwartz believes it is lahalacha. And as far as dat yachid, meaning he's an individual opinion, there are very few opinions to go with at all. So it's hard to say that there's a majority opinion anywhere. Go ahead, Anton.
A majority about what specific?
About Shabbat.
Oh, okay. And the Chtam Sofer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's a big question.
I mean,
I would like to understand better, and I don't know, maybe Rabbi Mallet has some thoughts on this, but I want to let Antonio get into this. But while Antonio's talking, maybe Rabbi Mallet will think about this, and maybe he'll come on and even tell us something. What parts of the Mitzvot B'nai Noach rules that we have are lahalacha, and how do we know? Like, where's that line? Because it seems that almost all of this was developed theoretically, and to me, and when especially in the Rishonim, and it's not clear to me where it's a lahalacha and when it's not lahalacha. Beyond, of course, when the Achronim brings something down, but that tends. I mean, I've not done a really deep dive into the Achronim, and I know there is actually some literature on this, but it's not clear to me where that line is at all on where this becomes lahalacha at this point. And part of the challenge here is that Jewish law, the way what's lahalacha now compared to 500 years ago versus 1,000 years ago is really complicated. It's a huge issue. So, and I don't think we've resolved that. But we don't have to open up that huge can of worms.
I would just mention to what Yosef said. So Rabbi Cook, for example, says you have this issue of shvita, right? Of refraining from work, which we say the issue would be that it's recognized as someone's gonna misconstrue what you're doing and thinking you're acting as if like a Jew is. The question that Rabbi Cook says is like the context. Are you doing this like in a Christian and a Gentile context, or are you doing this in Israel right now, where the norm is to abstain from work on Shabbat, and then it wouldn't be weird anymore? That has a tremendous ramification, though, for Noahides that are living in Israel, because now it's no longer an issue of people getting confused about what they're doing.
How large is the Noahide community in Israel?
In Israel, I don't know. I mean, Rav Shirky talks about like 100,000. That's like the number.
That's worldwide.
Right. I'm saying that's worldwide. So I don't know.
The majority is not in Israel, right? The
majority. No. The majority is not in Israel.
Is in like the U.S., the Philippines, and like some really random places.
He just came back.
Let's actually let Antonio speak.
Antonio.
Sorry, Antonio.
No, that's fine. I came here mostly to listen. I could have swore the majority was in the Philippines, but I could be wrong. Regarding someone's comment about a Noahide being liable for death, I actually kind of like stuff like that. I just think of the Peter Parker meme where he tells Harry, it's like, I already told you I'm Noahide. You don't have to sell it to me. No, I kind of treat it pretty lightheartedly, most of the stuff. But I have a real rabbi, or I guess a rabbi, Chabad rabbi, that I have a relation with right now. And then I have 3 not a rabbis online. So I feel pretty good.
Chezi at least is a rabbi.
Right.
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment too about the mind blown kind of phenomenon that like it's always in a positive way. It's really like it like ignites a spark in every sort of not observant or like kind of whatever on the spectrum they are, to hear that there is a non-Jewish or a Gentile person who is following Judaism is like they might have some some recognition of what that is, but they're just I think just kind of floored by the amount of like literacy or like just it's like, oh, all these words, what these things are. And I mean, honestly, like I think that the Noahides that exist need to like come out of the woodwork a bit, because it's going to I think bring some rejuvenation to to Jews,
Well,
because it'll give them some mission and purpose. It's like, well, okay, like I guess we have to rise to the occasion here. We've got all these people who are suddenly now like trying to grab these tzitzit that don't exist or are tucked away or whatever. So what do we do? And I think that's inspiring.
And I want to say too, there was a conversation a while ago on your Discord, Jacob, and someone was asking, how would you describe Noahide or Noahidism to somebody? And I think it was Eddie that said Christianity without the icky parts. But so I bring that up because from my perspective, I see a lot of religious nuns every day that would just love Judaism, and they just don't know about it. Like, first of all, of course, they don't know about Noahides, but they don't even know anything about Judaism.
Yeah.
So,
On Jonathan's point, what that reminded me of a little bit was some of the stuff from like Paul Vanderklay's server and stuff, where Christians, but really people who've been going to church all their life, or even sporadically over their lives, getting a second wind from Jordan Peterson or Jonathan Pajot, helping them kind of appreciate their own traditions better, even if they're not going to go to Eastern Orthodoxy, and even when they saw people outside their tradition, especially Peterson, who was not particularly religious when he started all this, and who knows what he is now. When they saw his appreciation for it, they then began to appreciate that they had something worth more than they had previously like understood. I don't necessarily think it's as messianic as Desi. I don't know if they're going in that direction. I mean, I get that impulse. To me, that's very much more of a maybe religious Zionisty, Israeli, whatever impulse of. Whereas I don't, on the American on the ground perspective, I would highly doubt that that's probably what they're thinking. Though it's possible. I mean, post 6 Day War, such sentiments were kind of revealed in the general non-religious Jewish populace, but to some degree. But,
yeah, Phlebas asks, is this movement driven by the internet? Seems a lot of these days. And I have to
100%.
tell you, it is to some extent, but it really started, and it's mostly driven by the more messianic fringe in Judaism. Both Chabad and the Zionists, it's the messianic fringe that tends to actually be excited about the Noahide movement. And it started in the 70s and 80s really because of the 6 Day War and Israel and messianic fervor around Chabad. And so, yeah, it is driven. But I have to say, some of the most crazy all of the anti-Noahide stuff is internet driven. Like, there are these crazy anti-Noahide things. like videos with hundreds of thousands of views about how the the rabbis are going to come and kill all of the Gentiles. It's like
the internet is just an accelerator on a lot of these things, pro and con. But I mean, look, I was around in the 80s, but that was pre-internet. I was a kid, but if it wasn't for the internet and the algorithms, this stuff would not have gotten on my radar. And to Antonio's point, like there are Christians, ex-Christians, deconstructionist Christians who are unaware and ignorant. I mean, in a not in a pejorative sense, but like just unaware of what Judaism teaches. I mean, 18 months ago, I probably would have like spouted off, or not spouted off, but just like if someone were to ask me, what do Jews believe about X, Y, and Z, I probably would have just been like, oh, things that Reform and conservative think, or Reform think. There is no afterlife, or blah blah blah, or just like
you can be an atheist as a Jew.
And you should be, or whatever, right? Like it's just ridiculous stuff. But like, you dig a little deeper, and I mean, I have to say that like, from a presentation standpoint, you might have beef with Rabbi Mizrahi, but like, he's gonna be a portal into, I mean, because of his signal, and I mean, you can move past it or whatever, but like there is some, you're just gonna have to deal with the fact that like people are gonna come into this from a variety of sources, and it's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be better than nothing.
Hey, look, if God can use my channel, he can certainly use Yosef Mizrahi's channel.
Hey.
Amen.
I was going to also say to Flevis, like, it's complicated because there was a Noahide movement, as I mentioned, pre-World War II, and it basically got completely destroyed because it was only in Europe. And it numbered, I saw one number that said 15,000, which is actually, considering pre-World War II, it's actually really significant. But like the fact that, so this was not, so this hasn't only ever been a Noahide thing, even in the modern period. Oh, sorry, an internet thing. And it's my impression, and we don't really have too many people here involved in the Philippines Noahide movement. Maybe we should remedy that. But it's my impression that in the Philippines, where they had entire congregations converting, it was much less internet-based. And essentially, it was a large part a rejection of kind of Christian colonialism, while still wanting to maintain a bunch of the monotheistic framework. The icky, they wanted to get rid of the icky parts of Christianity, but it was not particularly internet fueled or spread, and it was much more kind of in real life, socially, organically spread through communities, kind of working in concert. But that being said, it's a little complicated because you also have, as Jacob likes to point out, people from Messianic Judaism who tend to come into Judaism, but there's non-Jews in Messianic Judaism who sometimes end up as Noahides, because they understand there's a difference. They don't have to necessarily become Jews. And there's a bunch of different weird paths that people have taken that I've encountered. At least I'm sure you guys, who probably meet more Noahides than I do, maybe interacting online spaces, Jacob or Billy or Jonathan or Antonio, or even Thezi, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe you probably heard of even more weird and random paths to how people end up in this space. So internet's part of it, but I would be careful to credit it, especially if the biggest country with Noahides is not internet fueled. It's a little bit hard to say, but I think in the West, for sure. I think like in our context, for sure, that's a huge.
Entire churches becoming Noahide, I would say, is more a actual thing than individual people on the internet becoming Noahides, which is weird.
For now, I think it's gonna accelerate. I think the internet will make it so the one-off Noahides will eventually become the plurality, and I mean, I'm obviously just predicting based on my own experience or whatever, but I think that the norm is going to be it's going to go viral, and I mean, that probably sounds like kind of messianic, like in some way, but like there's
We
going to be a
approve.
there's going to be a mechanism. So
Yeah.
so why isn't the mechanism going to be technology? I mean, it's possible, right? I'm just leaving it
Totally
open.
possible. Totally
Anyway,
possible. I think
Hey,
All of us believe in the Messiah here.
me too.
that is what that I mean. Rabbi Cherokee whole move is that he believes that in the next, you know, in the next years, this will become like he's waiting for basically noise to become like a critical mass, and then it's just going to be a reality that like the world just needs to contend to. And he's saying, my little booklet over here is just the first stone in like the scaffolding, basically creating like some sort of structure that that could absorb this. I would mention just as far as the icky stuff. I definitely saw that with regards to observing the Shabbat as a Noahide, you can't do that if you are, like we've mentioned in the past, that there might be some leniency with Noahides and Shituf, and as like um, participating in some other sort of religion as well, or sort of like pseudo religion, even if it's not considered idol worship. With regards to observing the Shabbat, because it's a spectrum, the attitude is like if you're still playing a game of, let's say, having a relationship still with, let's say, some other religion, even though it's quote unquote permitted, then you're not ready for the commitment of Shabbat yet. Even if that commitment is not happening necessarily through the same, even if that Shabbat is different than the Jewish Shabbat, as in you're keeping the appropriate Noahide Shabbat, even then, that's only if you are a more observant Noahide, so to speak. So like again, like it did seem clear that even though it's a spectrum, you definitely have to be closer towards accepting the religion of Israel. And there are terminology where like you find yourself really between a ger, like a convert, and a Noahide. It's like this middle ground.
Billy.
Let me add to that. So the two Noahides I know personally come out of Torah roots movements. Baptists that went, Torah observant and then realized that they were wrong and went Noahide. But as someone, I'm for the idea of a Noahide celebrating Shabbat, but I am also one of those guys that's in that weird spot of between Noahidism and Christianity. And I agree with Hezi that someone in my position should not try. That you should hold, if you're in the middle, you should wait until you're further on down the line. Also, the two Noahides I know, you're gonna have to pry the seat off of them because I can't talk them out of wearing them. Like they just refuse to not wear them.
So I have to say, okay, so several things. First thing is, as far as not wearing tzitzit, Rabbi Shochat, blessed memory, was very against people wearing tzitzit. There are other opinions, specific, especially if you have gone before a rabbinic court, and consult your local Orthodox rabbi. Crusader Queen asked a really good question. Do the Noahides attend synagogues? Usually, this is not a dumb question at all. Very, 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 very few synagogues are prepared to receive Noahides. There are some congregations of Noahides, but those are very rare as well. Hopefully, any Chabad would be willing to allow at least a Noahide to have some participation. Unfortunately, not all of them are. Is it all deconstructed evangelicals?
Wait, before you move on, go back one. So in the modern Orthodox world in America, it occasionally a Noahide will show up. It is pretty rare. Much more frequently, or the non-Jews who might be around services are people in the process of conversion. I so happen to have most of the synagogues I've belonged to actually are pretty active in helping converts under the current Orthodox Beit Din in America. So my congregation's generally attracted those people specifically. Occasionally, though, that also means there are Noahides that do come, and I've never heard of anyone having an issue. As far as active participation, like you're not going to be called up to like read from the Torah probably, or lead services. But as far as attending, praying with the congregation, none of that should be a problem. Though there is, and to his credit, or whatever, while Noahides could pray anything they want as long as it's within bounds of monotheism or whatever, Rav Shirky's prayer book is very specifically made such that it is very close to the Jewish prayer book, just with a couple differences, so that if a Noahide wanted to pray with Jews, they would be able to fairly easily. And I really appreciated that about it, because that is not the approach others have taken to thinking about what Noahide prayer ritual should look like. And pushing that it should look as similar as possible so that joint prayers could be possible, I think is a nice ideal to have.
I would just stress on that point specifically that the reason, I think it's beautiful that he did that to keep it very similar. So his attitude is that the Noahide can feel comfortable in a synagogue. However, like Yosef is saying, there are specific words, like you saying, like our forefathers, when they're not your forefathers, then that's like there's like there's an issue there. So it's actually it's phrased and written in a way that really is accounting for that. I would also mention that as far as participating in synagogues, I have heard the opinion that in order to make sure someone doesn't feel that like this is some sort of hoodwink situation going on and you're being infiltrated, that someone that's taking this on seriously should have some sort of recognizing sign, as in like his kippah, his skull cap could have the letter Nun on it for Noach, or elements like that. They
might think they're breast lovers. They might think they're breast lovers if they put Nun on
right. I'm not sure.
And
I'm not sure I love that idea, though.
Rabbi Shochat he thought that Noahide shouldn't wear yarmulkes. He was particularly, he had his opinions. As far as the deconstructed evangelicals, I have to say it's not that it's all deconstructed evangelicals, but there are a lot of people who go through the Hebrew roots movement, and Jews for Jesus was a great help in creating the Noahide movement. So, yeah. A few weeks ago, pastor of a Messianic congregation, Richard Cortez, and 20 of his followers converted to Judaism. If I remember correctly, that was conservative, so not actual Judaism, but there are definitely such things. And as far as Muslims, yeah.
Going back to that for a second. So this was a topic of conversation on Sunday at our lunch meal in the sukkah. That I did not bring it up, but my host brought it up because this actually goes back to a huge issue that is related to this conversation to some degree, which is in the 80s, there was a congregation of Christians that converted to Judaism. I don't think they were Messianic Jews. I think it was a Christian community that converted to Judaism. And they made Aliyah. So they went to Israel, they immigrated to Israel because they were now Jews. This was still under Rabbi Goren. It was the early 80s. So he was the chief rabbi at the time. And while the pastor of that congregation remained a committed Orthodox Jew his whole life, a number of his followers who converted were actually trying to missionize for Christianity secretly and were not true converts. And this is that's the beginning of some of the official hostility of the Rabbanut in Israel toward especially Messianic Judaism, but also starting to question people's validity of conversion. And so there's this is kind of resonant because it's like, how and where does this? On the one hand, this should be like great news. Okay, we can talk about conservative Orthodox, but like in general, awesome, they become Jews. But there's kind of a history here that's a little more complicated. And especially nowadays, given the increase in the number of people pretending to be Jews and missionizing secretly, there's a lot of fear around it, and that creates a lot of issues both for Noahides and for potential converts, and for people making Aliyah who've already converted. So, yeah.
What's the prohibition or like the rationale behind like Noahides not wearing like a yarmulke?
Chiddush dat. So Maimonides says that it is prohibited for Gentiles to create a religion, and so Rabbi Shochat was very stringent, and he believed that adding any religious commandment, any religious garments, any would be chiddush dat, would be something that somebody is deciding to do by himself. And so there is that opinion that a Noahide, at the very least, should not feel a religious obligation to do anything beyond that which is not commanded is prohibited under that opinion.
Sure, but a voluntary identification with, or just like I want to do the mitzvah, like Rambam is cool with some of that stuff, or like it seems like he talks like he's cool with some of that stuff, and like we're not talking about Shabbat.
That's the rub.
That's the rub, right?
And there's a question of confusion between Jews and Gentiles, which also becomes a.
Well, I mean, maybe Noahide should wear like a red, like a Cardinals cap.
That's what Chezi was talking about with the N of Noahide.
It's a chicken and an egg. Like I'm saying, once there's a critical mass, the reality changes, and that sort of, in a certain way, it will force rabbis, which rabbis would be okay with, if like the reality changed in such a way where they're being like, okay, these four opinions are no longer relevant anymore, so we don't have to deal with them anymore. But right now, you're still in this place where like all of these are up for grabs as far as religion, and someone that's more conservative is going to be like, I'm just going to lean on like the more conservative take over here and tell you that like wholesale, this is like a shanda, or all of this is not relevant. And the ones that are more open, the extreme, let's say, being Rav Shirky coming and saying, the extreme being, let's say, the conversation Jacob posted, that link of the guy saying like, he hit the mother lode and Noahides could do what they want. To Rabbi Shirky saying like and again, it's indicative of this conversation. There's 3 Noahides over here right now, and like it's good ratios, and 3 Orthodox Jews, again, like we're living it live. Like I'm very optimistic about this, generally speaking. Like these are beautiful problems to have, and I think it's exciting to be even part of a discussion that is, let's say, ongoing. I believe the Torah is always like eternal and ongoing, but you don't always get to be in a conversation that, like, for example, engineered meat or AI. Yosef is like on the cutting edge right now of like, where technology bumps up against like halacha and where that needs to develop. So here too, you guys are the pioneers, and really, like, if anything, this conversation is, which I think both Jacob and Yosef would agree with me here, it's just really to empower you and just like salute you guys with like, your observance, your commitment. And it's as a Orthodox Jew, it is so inspiring to see. So really, thank you guys.
Rabbi Mullet is pointing out that Maimonides, it's not so clear that, like, yeah, there are various levels of what you call Noahide and what you don't call Noahide. Like a Ger Toshav, Islam certainly, like, it's very questionable that you could call Islam a ger toshav, but yeah, these are not simple questions.
Right, you could say that Rashi sees that there's two different types of ger toshav. There's a ger toshav that accepts the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, and then again, like I was saying, there's ones that accept it and specifically are not keeping avodah zara. There's no shituf, and they want to start getting closer. Then you start having other opinions.
And there's a real question of, okay, what do we say about people who don't really have any relationship to Judaism whatsoever, right? Your average Muslim going to mosque in, I don't know, some part of Pakistan or Malaysia, or some nice Christian in South America who like is just a good Christian person. Like what is that person, right? It's not so clear, and we don't have a very good vocabulary to talk about this stuff.
I would also add, I mean, because converts or potential converts have come up a couple times in this conversation, but there's this whole other, there's this weird spectrum that we haven't really addressed, which is one, Zeri Israel, the people who have a Jewish father, not a Jewish mother, who there is, well, generally, historically has not been considered Jewish. There's now certain rabbis who are pushing for more of their inclusion and at least addressing that community more directly. I know we've had at least one person on our server who, feels very strongly about this stuff. We've had a lot of trouble, as who's the son of a Jewish father and not Jewish mother, and wants to do Jewish stuff and got turned away from Chabad. We had a lot of tough struggles, right? The Zeri Israel conversation, I can't remember, there's an Israeli rabbi who's like written a new massive book about all the opinions on it. Has not been part of this discussion at all, and whether they should be, is the best, should they be, where are they between, a Noahide and a convert, or just a Noahide and a normal and the full Jew? Like where do they fall? And also the whole question, very closely related, but even more down on the spectrum, but we're probably also getting a lot of people interested. Another internet phenomenon, maybe more internet phenomenon than Noahides actually, is the descendants of the forced converts of the Inquisition, right? So what we call the Anusim, or used to be called the Marranos. So there are now multiple congregations, especially in the American Southwest and in northern Mexico, and a couple in Portugal and Spain and in Brazil, of these descendants of, and they may be saying, who knows, maybe they have one Jewish ancestor, who's forced to convert, 300 years ago. But these are people who are rejecting their Christianity to some degree or another, and have done, let's say, a genetic test, or they have some family story, or they realize, when their mom or grandma secretly lit candles every Friday night but never told them what it was, or they always avoided this one food, they realize now, thanks to the internet, access to information, access to Jews, whatever it is, that they're actually the descendants of these groups of people, and they're actively interested in Judaism or something Judaism adjacent. They're not necessarily wanting to be always fully convert, as some people do. And they, in some ways, I've seen, because there's actually PBS just ran a documentary on the Anusim issue, because it's like big enough that there's it's really gaining some publicity. Part of this was a genetics paper from 8 years ago that showed that 25% of South Americans have at least one Jewish ancestor from this period. Now, of course, most of them are not going to be maternal, direct line halachic Jews in any meaningful way. We understand that, but at the same time, they're very much in the camp of kind of the Zeri Israel category of having some Jewish ancestry, even if it's not halachic, and wanting to do something more Jewish, even if it's not convert or become fully Jewish. So there is 25% of South America is massive, even if only a fraction of 1% of those wanted to explore some things around Judaism. Let's say Noahidism.
Large numbers of people are converting to Judaism.
Right. So we had, large, I don't know about large, but I know we're talking about in the hundreds, right? Maybe in the low thousands.
No, it is the number of people. There have been articles about this. The number of people who are trying to convert to Judaism has overwhelmed local Jewish congregations.
Tivia Singer loves dropping this anytime. He's like, you can't even get on the phones. The phones, they're off the line. They're calling all day. All day they're calling. Yosef, I would just say on your line about like 25% of Latin Americans. I can't remember where this article is, but I saw an article that like around 20 to 30% of
Lost them.
Your sound is a lot worse now, Yosef. I don't know.
I had to switch to my phone because my computer crashed. So until my computer reboots on my phone, sorry. Will say that as far as I can tell, very few Orthodox rabbis are doing anything with the Muslim communities, and it's almost entirely conservative rabbis. And especially the ones who are actually like running congregations or like providing rabbinic support. Like the guy who goes back and forth, he's in Mexico and Arizona, he goes between two congregations every week, and like he's a conservative rabbi. And they're often some of the most committed conservative rabbis, but it is interesting that this has not really picked up a lot of steam on the Orthodox side. And to me, it's disheartening. I mean, it's great that people are calling Toby Singer, but like, and whatever, keeping his phones, ringing off the hook. But like, at the same time, I'm not really seeing the mainstream Orthodox. I mean, we're not seeing it with Noahides either. I guess it's always just kind of more fringy, messianic minded elements for the religious Zionists or Chabad, as you pointed out. I don't think that those same impulses drive people to try to provide infrastructure for the other, even though in many ways they're converging communities. There could be.
Yosef, there is. I mean, at some point we are going to stop accepting converts, and the more messianic you are, the more you want to see that day come.
I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying. You might want to clarify those remarks.
What do you mean? There is this idea that in order to convert to Judaism, it has to be in a time when it is actually disadvantageous, so that we know that you are not doing it just for an advantage. And there has been a widespread tradition that when the Messiah comes, there will no longer be a conversion to Judaism allowed. To being a member of Israel.
Which is based on this principle that during the days of King David and King Solomon, their conversions were not accepted. Now, on the flip side of this, it's very complicated because there's a Jewish community that does not accept converts at the moment, the Syrians, that I think all of us have very strong opinions about that wisdom of that choice. And I understand where it comes from.
No. Okay, so I have to say, I have very strong opinions about this, because there's a vast difference between a rabbinic court saying we will no longer accept converts and a community that refuses to recognize that valid rabbinic courts have done conversions and refuses to recognize those conversions which have been done la halacha. That is an Isser Deoraita, and they are there is no Holkin. Like it is obviously they are going against Torah law, and these people are, as far as I'm concerned, not Orthodox Jews. And I don't care if it is lots of rich Syrians. And frankly, if the Syrian community wasn't as rich as it is, it wouldn't fly like it does. So
I hear outside my kids, both of them, or maybe three of them, are all up. So I'm gonna have to go. However, I wanted to say, just end on the note that I was mentioning before my battery died, that there's like 30% of Palestinian Arabs might have come from Jewish descent, which is obviously like a very, very difficult stat to deal with. However, conversations like this Abraham Accords, the fact that please God we'll have peace with Saudi Arabia. We're living in fantastic, fantastic, fantastic times. I salute you all. We'll keep
Sherry
up.
wants to know where your sukkah is.
Sorry. Two last things. One, Sherry, my sukkah is outside. I'm inside the house right now. Number two, right after the holiday, I am, if he accepts this, I'm going to be speaking to Rabbi Shirky about having like a much more official channel that's dealing sort of with the Anglo community via his organization, though. And if that becomes relevant here and to you guys, I would obviously be glad to be another resource to you guys if possible. But we'll take it one step at a time. Jacob,
So you're going to
thank you
get
again.
smicha, Chezi?
Thank you again for putting this together. Yosef, Chag Sameach.
It's an
Chag Sameach.
I probably should also go soon, but I'll give you 5 more minutes.
I have
Yosef,
a weird question for it. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask real quick. Could you explain the decoration behind you?
Oh, no, it's just random. Just we had some extra kids, necklacey beads or whatever. We also have a paper chain, and I don't know what else is up here. You can't see them because they're very, very hard to see, but we do have the Ushpizien, which are like the like 7 Jewish leaders, archetypes, whatever. So there's one for each day of Sukkot. So there's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Yosef, Moses, Aaron, and David. So they're also up there. My daughter colored those in. But yeah, a lot of people will have like very, very, like, I don't know. It's very Sukkot decoration.
Yosef is Chabad. He's a descendant of Rapillo Paracher, so he goes for minimalist sukkah decorations.
Well, it's really not so minimalist. I have a flower. I can't. Let's see. Probably can't see flowers. There's other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, we don't have things like pictures of rabbis' faces or any brachas or pictures of Jerusalem. Nothing. We don't. I mean, I don't know. We used to hang more kind of harvest fruit, I guess, but we didn't do that this year.
So is the teardrop thing behind you kind of extra?
The teardrop thing behind me, it's just a fun little wind thing that spins. But I actually got that on Shavuos when I was not on Shavuos. I got that the day before Shavuos when I was in Singapore for a conference, which was a very interesting experience. Cool community, very cool Jewish community. But yeah, I don't know. I just liked it. I liked putting wind spinny things in my sukkah. Seems to make sense. So.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Christmassy vibes.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. We have the string lights.
Ornaments, string lights.
I mean, maybe Christmas is sukkah's vibes. What can I tell you?
Touche.
I was trying to explain. We just moved here like 6 months ago, but we were one of the sukkah hop stops. So people go like on the holiday to like different sukkot. Like it's usually like the kids in the synagogue or whatever it is. So we're in a community that just has like basically one synagogue, and it's pretty small. So there's like everyone. There's just like one route everyone goes on, and it's actually for all ages, not only kids in this community, which is a little different than when I remember growing up. But so we had 89 people here on Sunday in our backyard, in our sukkah, and everywhere. And you put out treats and stuff and whatever, and people make a bracha in the sukkah, and because it's a mitzvah, and they eat their food. And so our neighbors were confused. I was trying to explain to them, and I was like, it's kind of like trick or treating, but I didn't know what else to like. I don't know how to explain it to them. You're going around people's houses and getting treats. Okay, yeah. But I felt bad using that comparison.
No fair.
It's
You
like-
guys get to have Halloween.
Yeah, well, we have the dressing up part on Purim, and we have the passing out treats on Purim and on Sukkot. And simple stuff.
It's like Jewish fort building holiday.
Yeah, no, it is fun. I mean, people build all sorts of good things. I mean, I was when we got this was a kit, and we just got this like because we were in an apartment at the time, and it needed something to fit exactly in a parking space because that's what they would allow us to have. But it doesn't really fit our new house porch well, so I probably will try to jerry rig something kind of better for this space. But yeah, a lot of people, I mean, kits are like this modern, whatever, easy thing, and they are really easy. I mean, I can put this thing up in less than an hour, whereas like non-kit sukkahs can take days or whatever, a long time to put up. And my parents' sukkah was like heavy wood, like plywood boards that went all the way around, and 2x4s, and you're really doing a project. Whereas this is like, okay, one person can put it up in 45 minutes, an hour, and you're done. There's value to both. And yeah, so I mean, I like this. It's not bad. It served our needs. It's a little small, but it's for when we want to actually like host enough people, like, more people now. But it's done. Served me well. Yeah, I really like Sukkot. It's one of my favorite holidays. I like being outside. And our sukkah has like see-through walls, so like it feels very exposed, which I think is kind of the point. They're very, very vulnerable. It's nice.
The last sukkah I was in was in the back of a truck.
Ah, nice.
Chabad for you. Yeah.
Well, now I've been seeing more of these like top of car sleepers, and like I haven't seen a sukkah version yet though. I'm waiting for Chabad to like get in on that.
So I know that some families will, when they're traveling, they will get cars with sunroofs, and then they have schach, that have a bamboo mat over the sunroof so that they can
eat in the car.
Yeah, they can sleep in the car. Yeah, the people who are careful to sleep in the sukkah.
Chabad doesn't usually sleep in the sukkah, right?
No, Chabad, Bedavka does not sleep in the sukkah. Yeah, it's not Chabad.
Some of the Torah Roots guys that I know use canvas wall tents. They're like the heavy duty camping tents. That they use those, and you can get them like 12 by 20, so you can pack a bunch of people in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the problem with those is the schach, according to Halacha, the roof has to be made of certain materials, actually so you can't use any actual worked material. It has to be a rough material for the schach. So,
yeah.
Okay. I don't know any Torah Roots guys that keep halakha at all. So.
When I first got to college, like a freshman week, I knew nothing, no one. I got locked out of my room. It was Erev Shabbos. It was like that's when they wanted us to move in because the non-Jewish students moved in on Saturday, but they told the Jewish students have Shabbat. You can move in on Friday. We'll let you in a little bit early which was great. It was very nice of them to accommodate. I got locked out of my room. I had no idea what to do. I didn't have my phone, like nothing. So I had to go and take a shower, and I was like literally in my bathrobe and with my soap, and I was locked out. And it was like 2 hours before Shabbos, maybe an hour and a half. And it was getting closer and closer. And I see like 2 doors down from me, I noticed that there's a mezuzah on the door. And I'm like, maybe it's another Jewish student who moved in early. So I knock, and it's my RA, it turns out. I didn't know at the time. I didn't, and she's not Jewish. She's actually Catholic. But for some reason, her family puts up mezuzahs because her dad was reading the Bible and discovered this, reading the Shema, and realized, oh, well, I care about these first 2 lines in the Shema. But I should also care about the next 2, 3 lines. And they put up mezuzahs. So she didn't really understand the whole Shabbos thing, even though she knew the mezuzah part, which I thought was like fascinating. But I then wore her sweatpants and a T-shirt to the Hillel to find some people who could help me on my first Shabbos there. That's how people met me on my very first weekend at Princeton in the synagogue. I was in my flip-flops and her T-shirt and shorts, and I borrowed a kippah from the Hillel director. Because I had her hat to walk there. Then I got a kippah from the Hillel director. It was like the most awkward way to meet anyone ever.
You were walking around not wearing tzitzis?
I was walking around wearing juicy sweatpants. It was rather embarrassing and kind of crazy, but I was like, because it got to be Shabbos, and I was like, what do I do now? Like, what do I do? Like, so she did call the guys to unlock, like the maintenance guys to unlock my room, but they didn't get there before Shabbos. So I was just like, I need to eat. I don't know. I'm just gonna go to the dining hall and in the Hillel and whatever and daven and have dinner, and I'll come back and hopefully they'll fix my door by then. I don't know. Like, what am I gonna do? Yeah, it was really. Anyway, with that story, I'm gonna bid you all good night. It's been fun. Hopefully this accomplished some of your goals, Jacob. We didn't really go over the Breitowitz video like point by point or explain anything that he said, but we'll have to have yet another stream.
It's a multi-series.
Well, I mean, going through the actual things that he said, honestly, having Rabbi Breitowitz give that what he talked about, and the questions from Rabbi Schwartz, and now, so where'd you get the Lichtenstein book?
I ordered it online. I found someone selling it. I think it was a used copy even, but they're floating around. I mean, it's not in print anymore, but there's a number floating around. So. It came out in both Hebrew and English, so there's two chances you can get it. If
I'm gonna get it, I want the Hebrew because I want to know.
You want to look it up in Hebrew. Sure. I think Chazi has both editions. You should ask, so maybe he'll send you. But if not, it's only 130 pages. We probably could digitize it pretty easily, honestly. We're talking.
When was it printed?
I want to say 1981, 1979, somewhere in there.
Oh, so digital rights shouldn't be reserved. It might be on archive.org.
It might be. I don't know if the New York Public Library would have had it because that's who they use as their base collection. But he was already in Israel, I think, when it was published, but he had drafted it before he had made all of it, and before he became the head of Bush or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think anybody did digital rights reserved to digital rights before the 90s.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, there won't be digital rights. I just don't know. But anyway, if we need to scan it, we might be able to do that or parts of it. Basically, what he has a 20, 30-page introduction, and then each chapter after that is one of the 7 laws, like whatever sections of law. And then each one he basically gives it's very Mishnah Torah like. So basically, he's going to say these are the laws. He uses the count from the chinuch basically to tell that's the number law. How he's going to go through, but at the end, basically, he does. These are the positive laws and negative laws, and then in the footnotes, he brings all of the debates on any of the individuals. So, yeah, it's good. It's useful. He is not. I'd say he's kind of centrist on it. He's not as strict as Shochet, and he's not as expansive as Shirky or people even. I don't know whoever the guy is who you sent to Fezi, who I haven't seen yet. But you should send me that link too. I think he's in between. He's definitely.
I didn't send the link. That was Billy put it in the links on my Discord. Yeah.
So he's definitely more. He's more of the Maimonidean kind of Salvific Brisker tradition, but he's not. I think he's kind of on the middle of the spectrum than on a far side of that spectrum. Anyway, it's a useful book. And especially the fact that he's translating the Ben Mazog letters, which were all written in Italian, and none of us are fluent in. So that helps because I I know there is a academic translation of Ben Mazog that's impossible to get, as far as I know. Maybe someone else has. Maybe Fuzzy knows how to get it. But those are a pretty good source too, because there's like a couple dozen lengthy, almost essay-long answers that Ben Mazog was giving to the Noahide community in Italy, and answering questions. He was also corresponding with a couple of Italian clergy who were asking about the whole Noahide thing. So he's definitely trying to translate and work things in and make it accessible. And it's in some ways it's the most accessible. And if I remember, he was a postic for the Italian community in the 20s. So it wasn't like he was a nobody. But I know the Italki Jews they're not Ashkenazi, not Sephardi. They have their own weird traditions that none of us really quite agree with. So like, as far as like, do we all look to him as the opinion? Maybe not, but he does do some good footwork that is worth paying attention to. And it's nice that Lichtenstein translates parts of it so that English speaking audiences and Hebrew speaking audiences have access. I know that Rabbi, who's the French? Man. Why am I blanking? Subach left. There's a French rabbi who's done some of the work bringing the Ben Mazog stuff into French as well. So that's also worthwhile. Anyway, with that, yeah, okay. Rabbi Mullet's talking about the Syrians. It's complicated. There were real, to me, because at the time when they were actually issued the proclamation, and they were operating somewhat independently in places like Central and South America, and they did need to come up with something because there were a lot of people converting just for the sake of marriage and whatever. Like there were real issues they were trying to address, and I don't think we should forget that. But on the other hand, it's complicated. Yeah, because once those communities became connected up with the wider Jewish world in a global age, it's a little more complicated.
And it's not very clear that those rabbis kept it the same way that the people are doing it nowadays, because you're not going to accept converts. That's one thing, especially if they're not real converts. But then to not accept people who have actually lahalacha been converted, like I'm sorry, there's no place for this. This is not Orthodox Judaism. And I want to be Melamed Zchut, but there's a difference between Melamed Zchut and Melamed Shnut. Yeah. This is beyond the pale. And like, yeah, I said this back when I was when I was Shomer Torah and Mitzvot too, and yeah, I realize I'm not the greatest Jew in the world, but I don't understand how you can, as Orthodox Jews, allow such things as is coming out of the Syrian community. It is outside. I'm sorry. I really think if they weren't as rich as they were.
On the other hand, the state of Israel the Rabbanut seems to be getting closer to the Syrian position, and the very fact that they're even actively doing things like revoking people's conversions.
I don't think that's close to the Syrian
and saying that these I think it's closer. I don't think it's the same. I do think it's closer, because I think part of this comes with the centralization of authority, which I know Billy was arguing that we should have more centralized authority, but part of this is there are pains with centralized authority. This was a huge issue with the Ethiopian community, whether they had to convert or not, because in Israel, when the Ethiopians first arrived in Israel's Rabbanut was less centralized, and basically wherever the Ethiopian Jews decided to live, their local rabbis got to decide whether they were going to convert or not, needed to convert or not. And the Rabbanut did give guidance that said they suggested converting, but there was a very vocal, small group of rabbis, it was like one or two, like really small, that said, like, absolutely not. These guys do not require any sort of conversion, and they're welcome to be part of our Orthodox Jewish communities. And guess what? The Ethiopian Jews, for the most part, decided to, when they had enough control over their lives, and the Rabbanut weren't totally at the state's control, they tried to move to those communities and just not have to deal with the whole conversion thing, because they found it very insulting in many ways. That, as far as they're concerned, they've been Jews for thousands of years, and they've been doing it themselves. And who are we to tell them they're not Jewish suddenly? And in fact, in their eyes, some of us aren't really Jewish. And do we need to convert up to Ethiopian halacha? Okay, that's
okay.
Well,
that's going too far.
You might think that, but there was issues when in the 19th century when Jews first started going to the Ethiopian communities in Ethiopia and saying, there are Jews that survived in other parts of the world. The Ethiopian Jews had no idea there were Jews in other parts of the world.
Okay.
And they were shocked. And they were shocked by the fact that these Jews who claimed to be the most observant Jews were not keeping the Tahara laws that they thought were still in effect. In Ethiopia, they still did things like you said that if you're tahor, if you're a tameh and a man, and that includes anyone who's coming from out, from Gentile lands, for 7 days you are outside the community. You go to mikveh, and you do not come into their towns for 7 days. And they were shocked that we didn't know that law. They thought it was like their priests, thought that we had lost the Torah. And this was like a serious issue for them, because they were like, do we accept that these people are really Jewish? And they eventually decided to accept it, but it was not actually so straightforward.
Yosef, ultimately, you have to believe that this is why I believe in the survival thing. That there is such a thing as a visible Israel that survives from generation to generation. And no, it's not some people who out in the middle of nowhere think they're Jewish. Visible Israel is visible Israel.
Okay, I stayed on longer than I meant to.
Okay.
Have a good night, guys.
Good night. And when it comes to you can go, Yosef. When it comes to what you call it, I mean, if the rabbis decided, if all rabbinic courts decided not to take converts anymore, I wouldn't find that shocking or objectionable. But the idea that you would say actual valid rabbinic courts have accepted somebody as a convert, and then to deny that person rights in your community, I'm sorry, I don't see how that can be tolerated within an Orthodox community. And we got way off the subject of Noahides.
Stay tuned next time for the actual discussion. I guess what I'm really curious about are the levels of Noahide, because I know there's a difference between the righteous Noahide and what's being described as permissible Noahide or something.
Right. So Rabbi Mullet brings up a very good point regarding, for example, Muslims. So I mean, we can go through this, and I think it is an important point. There is this question of, what do you say of just somebody who, so you have some nice Hindu person in Tamil Nadu, right, who lives in a Hindu community, all they know is Hinduism, and this person recognizes that there's a God in the world and that they should be a good person, and to the best of their ability is a good person. Does that person have a place in the world to come? And I would say that you can arguably say that I mean, this is where it comes as far as Maimonides. So Maimonides says that there's a this is something else that we're going to talk about. So Maimonides says that a person who simply keeps the commandments because he realizes that they're good things to do, and doesn't do it specifically because these are commandments given to God, by God to Moses, is not even considered a righteous Gentile. Now, that's a very, very stringent opinion that I don't know if I would say he's not a da'at yachid is the term, and a single person with that idea. But if somebody recognizes that there is a God in the world and is a good person because there is a God in the world, I think there's a very good place to say, okay, this person has a chelek in olam haba. this person has a place in the world to come, and we believe that God is perfectly just, and He will reward each person according to how good of a person they are, and He will punish each person according to how bad of a person they are. And it's not a off binary thing of salvation or damnation. And so in the gradations, you have to start off with the idea of, okay, this person is a good person as opposed to a bad person. Does that mean that this good person will receive no reward for being a good person? And Maimonides would likely say that that person will receive their reward in this world and not necessarily in the world to come if they don't believe in God, and possibly if they don't believe in the Torah given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Now, the question becomes, when you talk about not a Hindu necessarily, but you're talking about a Muslim or a Christian, and I'm not saying that this person necessarily believes in normal Christianity or normal Islam, but your average good, you have some good farmer in Pakistan who is a Muslim and believes in God and believes that Moses gave commandments, was given commandments by God on Mount Sinai that are incumbent upon him, and he may have certain wrong beliefs, but does that person have a chelek in Olam Haba? Does that person have a place in the world to come? I would say that there is a place to say that that Maimonides does leave room for that individual person, not necessarily all Muslims, but that individual person to be considered a what he terms Hasidei Umot HaOlam, the pious ones of the nations of the world. Now, a step up from that is somebody who actually believes in Orthodox Judaism as a Gentile and has not necessarily gone before some sort of rabbinic court at all, because it is specifically Maimonides who brings up this idea of going before a rabbinic court to accept this status on yourself. And according to Maimonides, but not necessarily everybody else, that person should in fact go before a rabbinic court. Now, what type of rabbinic court are we talking about? The fact is that nowadays we don't actually have smicha, we don't have actual rabbinic ordination. So a rabbinic court can consist of any three Jewish males. And so there are people who will convene ad hoc rabbinic courts, and there have been probably thousands of people who have gone. I know that, for example, Rabbi Tovia Singer convenes these types of ad hoc courts and accepts people as, and then such a person could be called a ger toshav. Now, the thing with a ger toshav, which usually gets translated as sojourner or resident alien, is that a true ger toshav, somebody who goes before an actual rabbinic court, like the rabbinic court we have here in Los Angeles, and accepts upon himself to be a Noahide, that person is a member of the Jewish community, and we as Jews have a mitzvah to take care of that person as a member of our community. And so if, God forbid, such a person becomes ill, the Jewish community has to take care of that person. And So that's already like that's joining the Jewish community in a very real way. And Rabbi Schwartz actually mentions this idea, which he says he doesn't say where he gets the idea, but he says there such an idea exists of so here let's pull this up. So he brings this up in the declaration. This declaration should include belief in the principles of the existence of one true God, who is everlasting, the creator of all things, guides all of his creation, is the one that gave the Torah on Sinai for all of humanity, and oversees all the actions of the human beings to reward and punish them for their deeds. Then the person should state that he is willing to fulfill the 7 mitzvot that were given to Noah. There are those who believe, and he doesn't say who these are, that this announcement should be accompanied by submersion in a pool of at least 660 liters. So mikvah tevilah, what became Christian baptism. However, we know of no basis for this view. And so tevilah, there's nothing, I am not aware of anything that says that going to a mikvah is prohibited. I mean, during the temple period, Gentiles certainly would go to mikvahs to purify themselves before going even into the courts of the Gentiles, or even being allowed in Jerusalem at all. And so, I mean, what exactly you do is up to the individual person, but the highest level certainly seems to be to go before an actual rightly constituted rabbinic court, and such a court would issue a certificate, a te'udah, that this person is a ger toshav. That, I mean, I actually have to wonder, according to Israeli law, Chezi's here, I have to wonder, according to Israeli law, if such a person doesn't have a claim under the law of return to Israeli citizenship. I would argue that they should. And so, like, that's a whole different thing than talking about whether a good Hindu in Tamil Nadu has a place in the world to come or not, right? We're talking about, is this person a member of the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, or not?
So those are basically all the levels.
Those are the various gradations that I am aware of. Yes. Whether you accept upon, I mean, for practically, for someone who's watching this, who's thinking of themselves as a Noahide, the first level would be just saying yourself, I believe that God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, and that includes the 7 commandments of Noah, and I believe that I should, and I have an obligation to, and I have a desire to keep these mitzvot. The next level would be to accept that upon yourself before an ad hoc rabbinic court, which, frankly, any 3 Orthodox Jewish males should be able to help you with that, or possibly actually going through a properly constituted rabbinic court like exists in many large cities.
Wait, so when I had you and Yosef and Hezi just now on the stream, I could have done this, and I missed the opportunity. Huh?
That is a question we have been wondering if it's possible to. We've actually, so the question of whether it's possible to do this online is something that I have been batting around with Chazi and Yosef. I personally don't feel comfortable sitting on such a rabbinic court. Chazi seems to believe that it's fine. Not necessarily proper. Yeah, like honestly, most people will not convene a rabbinic court without actually having at least one proper rabbi there, and hopefully a rabbi who has dayanut, which is the highest level of rabbinic ordination. So a dayan is a rabbinic judge. But yeah, I mean it's a valid question. If you can do it, I mean, whether you can do it online, I think a dayan could convene such a thing online, but I'm not a dayan, that's for sure.
I think Rabbi Singer there's some videos of him, a couple other rabbis
Doing it online. Yeah.
Doing it online, yeah.
I have seen people. It's been done online even by Rabbi Shirky. Yeah, so there are people who have done it online, but frankly, I mean, you're in Manhattan. You could very easily, and in fact, you're in Manhattan. I mean, I'm sure there's a Simchat Beit HaShoeva tomorrow night and Thursday night that you can attend, and you can easily find, like, just go up to the rabbis and say, hey, is there a dayan here? And I would be surprised if you could not find a dayan to constitute an actual rabbinic court for you, and they would be actually quite ecstatic and probably call you up to the stage and quite enjoy it. So if you want to do it, you're in the perfect place to do it at the perfect time, Jonathan. So yeah.
All right. Well, send me a message and let's figure out how I can do it. I'll take a video.
Beit HaShoeva. Actually, you know what? My friend Michal is in New York, is in Crown Heights for thing. I will give you his phone number.
I go take a selfie in front of the Rebbe's apartment.
In front of 770.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to send you. So Dr. Hakimi, Eddie. Eddie is also in New York. You should also contact Eddie. But let me. What's your thing, Jonathan? There you are. Okay. So there you go. You have Dr. Hakimi's, Dr. Michal's phone number now. That's his cell phone. He's in Crown Heights, and he's one of these very, very crazy Lubavitchers. And call him and bother him, and he's one of these crazy messianists who will see about getting it done for you.
What do I tell him? Jacob sent me?
Yeah. I'll text him. I'll text him.
Yeah, I need a Jewish introduction.
I'll give him. I'll text him. Yeah, I'll probably call him tomorrow.
Okay.
But yeah, Eddie's also in New York. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eddie's cool.
Eddie is cool. Yeah.
Is he in Brooklyn?
I believe so. Yeah.
A long ways away. Not really.
Crown Heights is in Brooklyn.
I know it. I know.
Manhattan, Brooklyn, come on, it's not that far.
Once you're in New York, everything's far away.
You get on a subway.
Yeah.
When are you flying back to Michigan?
Friday. So actually, I got plenty of time.
You have plenty of time, and frankly, I mean, there must be a Crown Heights Simchat Beit HaShoeva this 2023. Let me see. schedule. There was one tonight. There was one last night. There was one on. There was one on Sunday night. There was one on Monday. There's one on Tuesday. So they like. Yeah, let me see. It looks like they're having a Simchat Beit HaShoeva like every single night of. The yearly dancing was instituted by the Rebbe and has been led for decades by Rabbi Yisrael Shem Tov, who has once again ensured a nightly celebration over Chol HaMoed, featuring the biggest stars in Jewish music. Shizoli is on YouTube right now. Actually, I think they're still live. Are they?
So I'd be going to like a Jewish music festival and like sussing out the Dayan and doing an impromptu Noahide declaration.
They're live as we speak.
Oh wow!
Get in there, Jonathan.
If I wasn't so tired, I would get out of my hotel room and.
It's only midnight.
It's after midnight. How long will they go on?
Probably till morning.
Well, I guess I'll be there tomorrow too.
Yeah, this is yeah. So there you go.
What's the intersection there? You see the street signs? You zoom in.
I can't zoom in now.
No,
Kingston and Crown, I think.
Probably can't miss it if I go to Crown Heights, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you go to Crown Heights, just ask where the Simchat Beit HaShoeva is. Here, let me see if I can find. It's Crown Street and Kingston Avenue. Oh, that's the women's section. Whatever. If you go to Crown Street, you won't be able to miss it. If you go to 770, you won't be able to miss it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. See how tomorrow goes.
Yep. There you go. Okay. Anything else before I wrap this up?
No, I only really brought up the Noahide thing because when we were talking about evangelizing or proselytizing, I really think there's not an issue with I don't know how a good way to put it, but like promoting permissible Noahidism. Like what I mean by that is
Rabbi Wiener makes Maimonides. I mean, if you're going to be very thing on Maimonides, so let's pull up Maimonides. So Maimonides says in chapter, where's Maimonides? I believe in chapter 8 of Kings and Wars. The end of chapter 8, he says, okay, so Moses only gave the Torah as an inheritance to Israel. By the same regard, Moses was commanded by the Almighty to compel all of the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments given to Noah's descendants. And to compel all of the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments given to Noah's descendants. This is what Maimonides' opinion on this. And so, I mean, there's various opinions on
the next line.
But that's so the next line. If one does not accept these commandments, he should be executed. Yeah. Yeah. So like this stuff gets a little what should I call it? But
these are the thumbnail subtitles
Yeah.
for the videos.
Yeah. all the Jews going around executing all the Gentiles who don't agree to be Noahides. That's actually where people say it's actually that Maimonides, that clause of Maimonides would only apply when we have that's the Zionist argument about people living in Israel, is they should be compelled to be Noahides. I have to say, I personally would be very, very happy if, for example, the the papal nuncio in Israel were to go before a rabbinic court and accept Noahide status. I don't see the chief rabbinate denying it to him, and I don't see that it's very different from any other concordat that the Catholic Church makes with any other government. Certainly less problematic than the types of agreements they make with China and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important because there's kind of there's a religious aspect to being a Noahide and a secular as well. And the secular is, I think everyone agrees in this corner that it only works if it's situated within the religious. And I mean, the Noahide laws are basically the basis for all of civilized society. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I think we have to have ethical monotheism as the ideal, and it should be promoted as the ideal. Because otherwise it just, like, even as an atheist, right? It's like, as an atheist, I'm not even demanding that you have to change your personal beliefs. Like, the atheist can keep their personal beliefs, but the premise, you can't really reject it unless you're going to take all the logical implications of, well, non-ethical monotheism, which I think is what we're seeing today, the natural consequences of throwing out that premise.
Yeah, and Richard Dawkins, funny enough, is seeing it the most. Billy asks a very good question. If you're holding to minority opinion, couldn't that be considered as making a new religion? No. So the main problem with holding to a minority opinion, first of all, there's a positive mitzvah in the Torah to go after the majority, but that whether that is a commandment that applies to Gentiles is already a question. Whether that's something that we can apply today, since we don't have a very clear majority of what can and cannot be considered a majority or a minority opinion, is already a question by when you're asking about Jewish halacha, right? And that's what Yosef was trying to explain, for example, about halak Beit Yosef, or various other opinions, right? And he is very correct in saying that where there is no practice, where there is a practice, it's a lot easier to say, okay, we've been doing this for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and a person who continues to do things as they have been done for many years is it has that, that's perfectly fine. As far as minority opinion, for example, if a Noahide were to decide that he wants to follow the opinion of Rabbi Schwartz, who is an accepted scholar and who went ahead and issued decisive opinions, or Rabbi Shochat, for example. Either one is acceptable. The major problem there is actually the fact that Rabbi Shochat passed away and Rabbi Schwartz has passed away. And unfortunately, as far as I know, Rabbi Peretz, Rabbi Moshe Wiener, is not active in making these decisions anymore. And really knowing how to apply, so part of the reason for knowing the various minority opinions and knowing the various levels of stringency and things like that is, look, it matters what's going on in your own life. If you don't live anywhere near a synagogue or a Jewish school, and sending your children to the question of whether you should send your children to a public school or to a Catholic school or to, that's a real question. And that's a question that depends on your circumstances and what's going on in your life. And that's the type of thing that you should have a local rabbi, hopefully, or if not a local rabbi, a rabbi who can look at your situation and help you understand what's going on. And honestly, so I have been writing emails to Rabbi Breitowitz, and I spoke with Rabbi Peretz, who teaches Halacha, who's my Halacha teacher, and both of whom are poskim. And I have been trying to ask the questions from them when it's necessary, when things are unclear. But thank God, and honestly, I have to say, generally, I have not found that I have made profound mistakes. And as my rabbi said to me, "B'makom she'ein ish, af a herring is a fish." In a place where there are no men, even a herring is a type of fish. And so you do have Chazi and Yosef and even me to, if you have questions to ask. And as much as I hate to say it, if you have no one else to ask, then you can. It is not. You are not creating your own religion if you're asking me or Chazi or Yosef, and certainly Rabbi Breitowitz or Rabbi Peretz or Rabbi Sherky or any other competent rabbi, your local Chabad rabbi. If you're asking those people, you're not creating a new religion. That's for sure. You are following Jewish instruction according to what Maimonides seems to be saying. His thing with Chidush Dat was that a person should not create his own religion. And the question becomes, if you're not creating your own religion, like, how are you deciding what to do and what not to do? And I have to say that I have, in certain circumstances, taken the responsibility to say to certain people specifically that they can go to a Eastern Orthodox Christian church, and as I understand it, that is the best thing for them right now, and they should not feel any sort of compulsion about that. As somebody who believes in Orthodox Judaism, and I did not do that lightly. I feel confident that I am merely repeating the opinions of Orthodox Judaism in the particular situations that so when I was talking to Rabbi Peretz, I said to him, and he agreed with me, that oftentimes how you frame the question already clearly answers the question. The real question is, how are you going to frame it? And in the framings that I have seen, according to what's called the metziut, the facts of the situation, halacha has to follow the particular situation that you're talking about.
It's not an easy thing.
It is not an easy thing, and it is something where you have to, like, it does what's right for Simon is not necessarily right for Reuben, right? A person who, for example, let's say, was an alcoholic and or a drug addict and has no community to support them in their lifestyle, that is a very different situation for that person not to have a church around them than somebody who was able to live a healthy lifestyle without a church. And so it would be a mistake for a rabbi to categorically say every Noahide should not go to a church, when in certain circumstances that person certainly should be going to church. Frankly, I can see a place where a rabbi would tell certain Jews that, okay, where you are living, and the circumstances in which you are living in. So Rabbi Shulman, who is on Tanakh Talk, and he paskins halachot, he makes decisions, and as I understand it, he is qualified to do so. Rabbi Shulman has mentioned that, for example, he has had Noahides who come from Hindu families come and ask him questions, which I could guess what the questions were, and that he has privately given them private piskei halacha, decisions in Jewish law, which he would not broadcast publicly to everyone, but which were appropriate to that person and their family. And this is something that I have been very, very strong about, that there are such things as public halachic decisions which can be issued generally for everyone, and there are things which apply to individuals in their circumstance that they need to go ask a rabbi, and a rabbi in that circumstance needs to apply the halacha to that person. I talk a lot about that one artist who had a contract at a church to paint the icons on the walls, right? So that particular question was a question which needed to be asked of a rabbi, and I would be very surprised if the answer wasn't, of whichever rabbi they went to, wasn't that he could in fact be lenient and finish it. But yeah, good night, Billy.
Night. And yeah, I imagine these things are private because the decisions aren't necessarily good, but better than worse, right?
Well, they're not decisions that apply to everyone. So, for example, right, if your family is Hindu, right, then when you as a Noahide are allowed to go to a Hindu temple with your family depends on your situation and may require specific guidance, how and where and for what reason and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. I'll give you an example. One of my cousins was having a bar mitzvah, and it was at a conservative synagogue, and the food was not kosher. And so I asked my rabbi, what should I do? And he said, you can go, but you're not allowed to sit down. Now, there's nowhere in halacha that says, okay, don't sit down. But it's a question of my family knows that I keep kosher, and if I were to sit at the table, they might think that I was eating. So it was a very specific situation in which I had a specific reason, and the rabbi had a specific concern. So he told me, you can go, but you can't sit down. So I stood the entire time I was there. That is not a guidance that can be generally given. That's something that had to do with my cousin, that synagogue, the food, this, right? So halacha applies to each person. And that's why a rabbi, so like Chazi says, public versus private is a very important distinction. There are certain things which are, which publicly can be said, and publicly can be said. So, for example, when Rabbi Breitowitz says something publicly, because he is a posek, that is something that everyone who hears it can rely on. So he has to be very careful what he says. But at the same point, he also has the capacity that if you go and you ask him about your situation, so he can clarify what is good and bad in that situation for you.
Gotcha. And that's really hard. Like when it's not just what's best for someone who doesn't believe in Judaism, but someone who does, and like synagogue's not an option, and yeah.
And what your situation is. Look, if you have kids, if you don't have kids, if you have a wife, if you don't have a wife, if your wife is a Christian, if your wife isn't a Christian, right? Unfortunately, there are people who go around calling themselves rabbis who are telling people to get divorces. Telling people because they are a Noahide that they should divorce their wives who are Christian. Yeah, it is absolutely inexcusable. Somebody who makes this some sort of rule that generally must be followed, like regardless of how old the kids are, what's going on, like this is such a person is not a rabbi. He's a fool and a sinner and a chote umachti, someone who sins himself and who causes others to sin. Okay.
Want to call it?
Last word. Yeah. You get the last word, Antonio.
I was not prepared for this.
Okay, tell you what. I'll give the last word.
Sounds good.
Look, we're walking through uncharted territory, and there are some things which are scary about that, but there's a lot of things that's very actually exciting and hopeful about that. And so, yeah, we're surfing big waves here, and that's exciting and good and happy. And so, yeah, let's keep on surfing.
Sounds good.